Chapter 46.
About 2 o'clock the following day, a calash, drawn by a pair of magnificent English horses, stopped at the door of Monte Cristo, and a person, dressed in a blue coat, with buttons of a similar color, a white waistcoat, over which was displayed a massive gold chain, brown trousers, and a quantity of black hair descending so low over his eyebrows as to leave it doubtful whether it were not artificial, so little did its jetty glossiness assimilate with the deep wrinkles stamped on his features. A person, in a word, who, although evidently past 50, desired to be taken for not more than 40, bent forwards from the carriage door, on the panels of which were emblazoned the armorial bearings of a baron, and directed his groom to inquire at the porter's lodge whether the Count of Monte Cristo resided there, and if he were within. While waiting, the occupant of the carriage surveyed the house, the garden as far as he could distinguish it, and the livery of servants who passed to and fro, with an attention so close as to be somewhat impertinent. His glance was keen, but showed cunning rather than intelligence. His lips were straight, and so thin that, as they closed, they were drawn in over the teeth. His cheekbones were broad and projecting, a never-failing proof of audacity and craftiness, while the flatness of his forehead, and the enlargement of the back of his skull, which rose much higher than his large and coarsely shaped ears, combined to form a physiognomy anything but prepossessing, save in the eyes of such as considered that the owner of so splendid an equipage must needs be all that was admirable and enviable, more especially when they gazed on the enormous diamond that glittered in his shirt, and the red ribbon that depended from his buttonhole. The groom, in obedience to his orders, tapped at the window of the porter's lodge, saying, "Pray, does not the Count of Monte Cristo live here?" "His Excellency does reside here," replied the concierge, but added he, glancing an inquiring look at Ali. Ali returned a sign in the negative. "But what?" asked the groom. "His Excellency does not receive visitors today." "Then here is my master's card, the Baron Danglars. You will take it to the Count, and say that, although in haste to attend the chamber, my master came out of his way to have the honor of calling upon him." "I never speak to His Excellency," replied the concierge. "The valet de chambre will carry your message." The groom returned to the carriage. "Well?" asked Danglars. The man, somewhat crestfallen by the rebuke he had received, repeated what the concierge had said. "Bless me," murmured Baron Danglars, "this must surely be a prince instead of a count by their styling him Excellency, and only venturing to address him by the medium of his valet de chambre. However, it does not signify. He has a letter of credit on me, so I must see him when he requires his money." Then, throwing himself back in his carriage, Danglars called out to his coachman, in a voice that might be heard across the road, to the Chamber of Deputies. Apprised in time of the visit paid him, Monte Cristo had, from behind the blinds of his pavilion, as minutely observed the baron, by means of an excellent lorgnette, as Danglars himself had scrutinized the house, garden, and servants. "That fellow has a decidedly bad countenance," said the Count in a tone of disgust, as he shut up his glass into its ivory case. "How comes it that all do not retreat in aversion at sight of that flat, receding, serpent-like forehead, round, vulture-shaped head, and sharp-hooked nose like the beak of a buzzard?" "Ali," cried he, striking at the same time on the brazen gong. Ali appeared. "Summon Bertuccio," said the Count. Almost immediately Bertuccio entered the apartment. "Did your Excellency desire to see me?" inquired he. "I did," replied the Count. "You no doubt observed the horses standing a few minutes since at the door." "Certainly, your Excellency. I noticed them for their remarkable beauty." "Then how comes it," said Monte Cristo with a frown, "that, when I desired you to purchase for me the finest pair of horses to be found in Paris, there is another pair, fully as fine as mine, not in my stables?" At the look of displeasure, added to the angry tone in which the Count spoke, Ali turned pale and held down his head. "It is not your fault, my good Ali," said the Count in the Arabic language, and with a gentleness none would have thought him capable of showing, Either in voice or face it is not your fault. You do not understand the points of English horses. The countenance of poor Ali recovered its serenity. "Permit me to assure your Excellency," said Bertuccio, "that the horses you speak of were not to be sold when I purchased yours." Monte Cristo shrugged his shoulders. "It seems, Sir Steward," said he, "that you have yet to learn that all things are to be sold to such as care to pay the price. His Excellency is not, perhaps, aware that M. Danglars gave 16,000 francs for his horses. Very well. Then offer him double that sum. A banker never loses an opportunity of doubling his capital. Is your Excellency really in earnest?" inquired the steward. Monte Cristo regarded the person who durst presume to doubt his words with the look of one equally surprised and displeased. "I have to pay a visit this evening," replied he. "I desire that these horses, with completely new harness, may be at the door with my carriage." Bertuccio bowed and was about to retire, but when he reached the door he paused and then said, "At what o'clock does your Excellency wish the carriage and horses to be ready?" "At 5 o'clock," replied the Count. "I beg your Excellency's pardon," interposed the steward in a deprecating manner, "for venturing to observe that it is already 2 o'clock. "I am perfectly aware of that fact," answered Monte Cristo calmly. Then, turning towards Ali, he said, "Let all the horses in my stables be led before the windows of your young lady, that she may select those she prefers for her carriage. Request her also to oblige me by saying whether it is her pleasure to dine with me. If so, let dinner be served in her apartments. Now leave me, and desire my valet de chambre to come hither." Scarcely had Ali disappeared when the valet entered the chamber. "Monsieur Baptistin," said the Count, "you have been in my service 1 year, the time I generally give myself to judge of the merits or demerits of those about me. You suit me very well." Baptistin bowed low. "It only remains for me to know whether I also suit you." "Oh, your Excellency," exclaimed Baptistin eagerly. "Listen, if you please, till I have finished speaking," replied Monte Cristo. "You receive 1,500 francs per annum for your services here, more than many a brave subaltern, who continually risks his life for his country, obtains. You live in a manner far superior to many clerks who work 10 times harder than you do for their money. Then, though yourself a servant, you have other servants to wait upon you, take care of your clothes, and see that your linen is duly prepared for you. Again, you make a profit upon each article you purchase for my toilet, amounting in the course of a year to a sum equaling your wages. Nay, indeed, your Excellency, I am not condemning you for this, Monsieur Baptistin, but let your profits end here. It would be long indeed ere you would find so lucrative a post as that you have now the good fortune to fill. I neither ill-use nor ill-treat my servants by word or action. An error I readily forgive, but willful negligence or forgetfulness, never. My commands are ordinarily short, clear, and precise, and I would rather be obliged to repeat my words twice, or even 3 times, than they should be misunderstood. I am rich enough to know whatever I desire to know, and I can promise you I am not wanting in curiosity. If then I should learn that you had taken upon yourself to speak of me to anyone favorably or unfavorably, to comment on my actions, or watch my conduct, that very instant you would quit my service. You may now retire. I never caution my servants a second time, remember that." Baptistin bowed, and was proceeding towards the door. "I forgot to mention to you," said the Count, "that I lay yearly aside a certain sum for each servant in my establishment. Those whom I am compelled to dismiss lose, as a matter of course, all participation in this money, while their portion goes to the fund accumulating for those domestics who remain with me, and among whom it will be divided at my death. You have been in my service a year. Your fund has already begun to accumulate. Let it continue to do so." This address, delivered in the presence of Ali, who, not understanding one word of the language in which it was spoken, stood wholly unmoved, produced an effect on M. Baptistin only to be conceived by such as have occasion to study the character and disposition of French domestics. I assure your Excellency, said he, that at least it shall be my study to merit your approbation in all things, and I will take Ali as my model. By no means, replied the Count in the most frigid tones. Ali has many faults mixed with most excellent qualities. He cannot possibly serve you as a pattern for your conduct, not being, as you are, a paid servant, but a mere slave, a dog who, should he fail in his duty towards me, I should not discharge from my service, but kill. Baptistin opened his eyes with astonishment. You seem incredulous, said Monte Cristo, who repeated to Ali in the Arabic language what he had just been saying to Baptistin in French. The Nubian smiled assentingly to his master's words, then, kneeling on one knee, respectfully kissed the hand of the Count. This corroboration of the lesson he had just received put the finishing stroke to the wonder and stupefaction of M. Baptistin. The Count then motioned the valet de chambre to retire, and to Ali to follow to his study, where they conversed long and earnestly together. As the hand of the clock pointed to 5, the Count struck thrice upon his gong. When Ali was wanted, 1 stroke was given, 2 summoned Baptistin, and 3 Bertuccio. The steward entered. My horses, said Monte Cristo. They are at the door harnessed to the carriage as your Excellency desired. Does your Excellency wish me to accompany him? No, the coachman, Ali, and Baptistin will go. The Count descended to the door of his mansion, and beheld his carriage drawn by the very pair of horses he had so much admired in the morning as the property of Danglars. As he passed them, he said, They are extremely handsome, certainly, and you have done well to purchase them, although you were somewhat remiss not to have procured them sooner. Indeed, your Excellency, I had very considerable difficulty in obtaining them, and as it is, they have cost an enormous price. Does the sum you gave for them make the animals less beautiful? Inquired the Count, shrugging his shoulders. Nay, if your Excellency is satisfied, it is all that I could wish. Whither does your Excellency desire to be driven? To the residence of Baron Danglars, Rue de la Chausse et d'Antin. This conversation had passed as they stood upon the terrace, from which a flight of stone steps led to the carriage drive. As Bertuccio, with a respectful bow, was moving away, the Count called him back. I have another commission for you, M. Bertuccio, said he. I am desirous of having an estate by the seaside in Normandy, for instance, between Le Havre and Boulogne. You see, I give you a wide range. It will be absolutely necessary that the place you may select have a small harbor, creek, or bay, into which my corvette can enter and remain at anchor. She draws only 15 feet. She must be kept in constant readiness to sail immediately I think proper to give the signal. Make the requisite inquiries for a place of this description, and when you have met with an eligible spot, visit it, and if it possess the advantages desired, purchase it at once in your own name. The corvette must now, I think, be on her way to F Camp, must she not? Certainly, your Excellency. I saw her put to sea the same evening we quitted Marseille, and the yacht was ordered to remain at Martigues. 'Tis well. I wish you to write from time to time to the captains in charge of the 2 vessels, so as to keep them on the alert. And the steamboat? She is at Ch. Lons. Yes, the same orders for her as for the 2 sailing vessels. Very good. When you have purchased the estate I desire, I want constant relays of horses at 10 leagues apart along the northern and southern road. Your Excellency may depend upon me. The Count made a gesture of satisfaction, descended the terrace steps, and sprang into his carriage, which was whirled along swiftly to the banker's house. Danglars was engaged at that moment, presiding over a railroad committee. But the meeting was nearly concluded when the name of his visitor was announced. As the Count's title sounded on his ear, he rose, and addressing his colleagues, who were members of one or the other chamber, he said, Gentlemen, pardon me for leaving you so abruptly, but a most ridiculous circumstance has occurred, which is this, Thomson and French, the Roman bankers, have sent to me a certain person calling himself the Count of Monte Cristo, and have given him an unlimited credit with me. I confess this is the drollest thing I have ever met with in the course of my extensive foreign transactions, and you may readily suppose it has greatly roused my curiosity. I took the trouble this morning to call on the pretended count. If he were a real count, he wouldn't be so rich. But would you believe it, he was not receiving. So the master of Monte Cristo gives himself airs befitting a great millionaire or a capricious beauty. I made inquiries, and found that the house in the Champs Elysees is his own property, and certainly it was very decently kept up. But pursued Danglars with one of his sinister smiles, an order for unlimited credit calls for something like caution on the part of the banker to whom that order is given. I am very anxious to see this man. I suspect a hoax is intended, but the instigators of it little knew whom they had to deal with. They laugh best who laugh last. Having delivered himself of this pompous address, uttered with a degree of energy that left the Baron almost out of breath, he bowed to the assembled party and withdrew to his drawing-room, whose sumptuous furnishings of white and gold had caused a great sensation in the Chausse d'Antin. It was to this apartment he had desired his guest to be shown, with the purpose of overwhelming him at the sight of so much luxury. He found the Count standing before some copies of Albano and Fatter that had been passed off to the banker as originals, but which, mere copies as they were, seemed to feel their degradation in being brought into juxtaposition with the gaudy colors that covered the ceiling. The Count turned round as he heard the entrance of Danglars into the room. With a slight inclination of the head, Danglars signed to the Count to be seated, pointing significantly to a gilded armchair, covered with white satin embroidered with gold. The Count sat down. "I have the honor, I presume, of addressing M. de Monte Cristo." The Count bowed. "And I of speaking to Baron Danglars, Chevalier of the Legion of Honor, and member of the Chamber of Deputies." Monte Cristo repeated all the titles he had read on the Baron's card. Danglars felt the irony and compressed his lips. "You will, I trust, excuse me, monsieur, for not calling you by your title when I first addressed you," he said, "but you are aware that we are living under a popular form of government, and that I am myself a representative of the liberties of the people." "So much so," replied Monte Cristo, "that while you call yourself Baron you are not willing to call anybody else Count." "Upon my word, monsieur," said Danglars with affected carelessness, "I attach no sort of value to such empty distinctions. But the fact is, I was made Baron, and also Chevalier of the Legion of Honor, in return for services rendered. But you have discarded your titles after the example set you by Messrs. de Montmorency and Lafayette. That was a noble example to follow, monsieur." "Why," replied Danglars, "not entirely so. With the servants, you understand. I see, to your domestics you are my lord, the journalists style you monsieur, while your constituents call you citizen. These are distinctions very suitable under a constitutional government. I understand perfectly." Again Danglars bit his lips. He saw that he was no match for Monte Cristo in an argument of this sort, and he therefore hastened to turn to subjects more congenial. "Permit me to inform you, Count," said he, bowing, "that I have received a letter of advice from Thomson and French, of Rome." "I am glad to hear it, Baron, for I must claim the privilege of addressing you after the manner of your servants. I have acquired the bad habit of calling persons by their titles from living in a country where barons are still barons by right of birth. But as regards the letter of advice, I am charmed to find that it has reached you. That will spare me the troublesome and disagreeable task of coming to you for money myself. You have received a regular letter of advice." "Yes," said Danglars, "but I confess I didn't quite comprehend its meaning." "Indeed, and for that reason I did myself the honor of calling upon you in order to beg for an explanation." "Go on, monsieur." "Here I am, ready to give you any explanation you desire." "Why," said Danglars, In the letter I believe I have it about me here. He felt in his breast pocket. Yes, here it is. Well, this letter gives the Count of Monte Cristo unlimited credit on our house. Well, Baron, what is there difficult to understand about that? Merely the term unlimited, nothing else, certainly. Is not that word known in France? The people who wrote are Anglo-Germans, you know. Oh, as for the composition of the letter, there is nothing to be said. But as regards the competency of the document, I certainly have doubts. Is it possible? Asked the Count, assuming all air and tone of the utmost simplicity and candor. Is it possible that Thomson and French are not looked upon as safe and solvent bankers? Pray tell me what you think, Baron, for I feel uneasy, I can assure you, having some considerable property in their hands. Thomson and French are perfectly solvent, replied Danglars with an almost mocking smile, but the word unlimited in financial affairs is so extremely vague. Is, in fact, unlimited, said Monte Cristo. Precisely what I was about to say, cried Danglars. Now what is vague is doubtful, and it was a wise man who said, when in doubt, keep out. Meaning to say, rejoined Monte Cristo, that however Thomson and French may be inclined to commit acts of imprudence and folly, the Baron Danglars is not disposed to follow their example. Not at all. Plainly enough, Messrs. Thomson and French set no bounds to their engagements, while those of M. Danglars have their limits. He is a wise man, according to his own showing. Monsieur, replied the banker, drawing himself up with a haughty air, the extent of my resources has never yet been questioned. It seems, then, reserved for me, said Monte Cristo coldly, to be the first to do so. By what right, sir? By right of the objections you have raised, and the explanations you have demanded, which certainly must have some motive. Once more Danglars bit his lips. It was the second time he had been worsted, and this time on his own ground. His forced politeness sat awkwardly upon him, and approached almost to impertinence. Monte Cristo, on the contrary, preserved a graceful suavity of demeanor, aided by a certain degree of simplicity he could assume at pleasure, and thus possessed the advantage. Well, sir, resumed Danglars, after a brief silence, I will endeavor to make myself understood, by requesting you to inform me for what sum you propose to draw upon me. Why, truly, replied Monte Cristo, determined not to lose an inch of the ground he had gained, my reason for desiring an unlimited credit was precisely because I did not know how much money I might need. The banker thought the time had come for him to take the upper hand. So throwing himself back in his armchair, he said, with an arrogant and purse-proud air, let me beg of you not to hesitate in nomming your wishes. You will then be convinced that the resources of the house of Danglars, however limited, are still equal to meeting the largest demands. And were you even to require 1,000,000, I beg your pardon, interposed Monte Cristo. I said 1,000,000, replied Danglars with the confidence of ignorance. But could I do with 1,000,000? Retorted the Count. My dear sir, if a trifle like that could suffice me, I should never have given myself the trouble of opening an account. 1,000,000. Excuse my smiling when you speak of a sum I am in the habit of carrying in my pocketbook or dressing case. And with these words, Monte Cristo took from his pocket a small case containing his visiting cards, and drew forth 2 orders on the treasury for 500,000 francs each, payable at sight to the bearer. A man like Danglars was wholly inaccessible to any gentler method of correction. The effect of the present revelation was stunning. He trembled and was on the verge of apoplexy. The pupils of his eyes, as he gazed at Monte Cristo, dilated horribly. Come, come, said Monte Cristo, confess honestly that you have not perfect confidence in Thomson and French. I understand, and foreseeing that such might be the case, I took, in spite of my ignorance of affairs, certain precautions. See, here are 2 similar letters to that you have yourself received, one from the house of Arstein and Esquels of Vienna, to Baron Rothschild, the other drawn by Baring of London, upon M. Lafitte. Now, sir, you have but to say the word. and I will spare you all uneasiness by presenting my letter of credit to one or other of these two firms." The blow had struck home, and Danglars was entirely vanquished. With a trembling hand he took the two letters from the Count, who held them carelessly between finger and thumb, and proceeded to scrutinize the signatures, with a minuteness that the Count might have regarded as insulting, had it not suited his present purpose to mislead the banker. "Oh, sir," said Danglars, after he had convinced himself of the authenticity of the documents he held, and rising as if to salute the power of gold personified in the man before him, 3 letters of unlimited credit. "I can be no longer mistrustful, but you must pardon me, my dear Count, for confessing to some degree of astonishment." "Nay," answered Monte Cristo with the most gentlemanly air, "'tis not for such trifling sums as these that your banking house is to be incommoded." "Then you can let me have some money, can you not?" "Whatever you say, my dear Count, I am at your orders." "Why," replied Monte Cristo, "since we mutually understand each other, for such I presume is the case." Danglars bowed assentingly. "You are quite sure that not a lurking doubt or suspicion lingers in your mind?" "Oh, my dear Count," exclaimed Danglars, "I never for an instant entertained such a feeling towards you. No, you merely wish to be convinced, nothing more. But now that we have come to so clear an understanding, and that all distrust and suspicion are laid at rest, we may as well fix a sum as the probable expenditure of the first year. Suppose we say 6 millions to 6 millions. Gasped Danglars, "So be it." "Then, if I should require more," continued Monte Cristo in a careless manner, "why, of course, I should draw upon you. But my present intention is not to remain in France more than a year, and during that period I scarcely think I shall exceed the sum I mentioned. However, we shall see. Be kind enough, then, to send me 500,000 francs tomorrow. I shall be at home till midday, or if not, I will leave a receipt with my steward." "The money you desire shall be at your house by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, my dear Count," replied Danglars. "How would you like to have it? In gold, silver, or notes?" "Half in gold, and the other half in banknotes, if you please," said the Count, rising from his seat. "I must confess to you, Count," said Danglars, "that I have hitherto imagined myself acquainted with the degree of all the great fortunes of Europe, and still wealth such as yours has been wholly unknown to me. May I presume to ask whether you have long possessed it?" "It has been in the family a very long while," returned Monte Cristo, "a sort of treasure expressly forbidden to be touched for a certain period of years, during which the accumulated interest has doubled the capital. The period appointed by the testator for the disposal of these riches occurred only a short time ago, and they have only been employed by me within the last few years. Your ignorance on the subject, therefore, is easily accounted for. However, you will be better informed as to me and my possessions ere long." And the Count, while pronouncing these latter words, accompanied them with one of those ghastly smiles that used to strike terror into poor France de Pinay. "With your tastes and means of gratifying them," continued Danglars, "you will exhibit a splendor that must effectually put us poor miserable millionaires quite in the shade. If I mistake not, you are an admirer of paintings. At least I judged so from the attention you appeared to be bestowing on mine when I entered the room. If you will permit me, I shall be happy to show you my picture gallery, composed entirely of works by the ancient masters warranted as such. Not a modern picture among them. I cannot endure the modern school of painting. You are perfectly right in objecting to them, for this one great fault that they have not yet had time to become old. Or will you allow me to show you several fine statues by Thorwaldsen, Bartoloni, and Canova, all foreign artists, for, as you may perceive, I think but very indifferently of our French sculptors. You have a right to be unjust to them, monsieur. They are your compatriots. But all this may come later, when we shall be better known to each other. For the present, I will confine myself, if perfectly agreeable to you, to introducing you to the Baroness Danglars. Excuse my impatience, my dear Count, but a client like you is almost like a member of the family." Monte Cristo bowed in sign that he accepted the proffered honor. Danglars rang and was answered by a servant in a showy livery. "Is the Baroness at home?" inquired Danglars. "Yes, my lord," answered the man. "And alone?" "No, my lord, Madame has visitors." "Have you any objection to meet any persons who may be with Madame, or do you desire to preserve a strict incognito?" "No, indeed," replied Monte Cristo with a smile. "I do not arrogate to myself the right of so doing." "And who is with Madame?" "M. Debray," inquired Danglars, with an air of indulgence and good nature that made Monte Cristo smile, acquainted as he was with the secrets of the banker's domestic life. "Yes, my lord," replied the servant, "M. Debray is with Madame." Danglars nodded his head, then turning to Monte Cristo said, "M. Lucien Debray is an old friend of ours, and private secretary to the Minister of the Interior. As for my wife, I must tell you, she lowered herself by marrying me, for she belongs to one of the most ancient families in France. Her maiden name was de Servies, and her first husband was Colonel the Marquis of Nargon. I have not the honor of knowing Madame Danglars, but I have already met M. Lucien Debray." "Ah, indeed," said Danglars, "and where was that?" "At the house of M. de Morcerf." "Ah, you are acquainted with the young Viscount, are you?" "We were together a good deal during the carnival at Rome." "True, true," cried Danglars. "Let me see. Have I not heard talk of some strange adventure with bandits or thieves hid in ruins, and of his having had a miraculous escape? I forget how, but I know he used to amuse my wife and daughter by telling them about it after his return from Italy. Her ladyship is waiting to receive you, gentlemen," said the servant, who had gone to inquire the pleasure of his mistress. "With your permission," said Danglars, bowing, "I will precede you to show you the way." "By all means," replied Monte Cristo, "I follow you."
Chapter 47.
The Baron, followed by the Count, traversed a long series of apartments, in which the prevailing characteristics were heavy magnificence and the gaudiness of ostentatious wealth, until he reached the boudoir of Madame Danglars, a small octagonal-shaped room, hung with pink satin, covered with white Indian muslin. The chairs were of ancient workmanship and materials. Over the doors were painted sketches of shepherds and shepherdesses, after the style and manner of Boucher, and at each side pretty medallions in crayons, harmonizing well with the furnishings of this charming apartment, the only one throughout the great mansion in which any distinctive taste prevailed. The truth was, it had been entirely overlooked in the plan arranged and followed out by M. Danglars and his architect, who had been selected to aid the Baron in the great work of improvement solely because he was the most fashionable and celebrated decorator of the day. The decorations of the boudoir had then been left entirely to Madame Danglars and Lucien Debray. M. Danglars, however, while possessing a great admiration for the antique, as it was understood during the time of the Directory, entertained the most sovereign contempt for the simple elegance of his wife's favorite sitting-room, where, by the way, he was never permitted to intrude, unless, indeed, he excused his own appearance by ushering in some more agreeable visitor than himself. And even then he had rather the air and manner of a person who was himself introduced, than that of being the presenter of another, his reception being cordial or frigid, in proportion as the person who accompanied him chanced to please or displease the Baroness. Madame Danglars, who, although past the first bloom of youth, was still strikingly handsome, was now seated at the piano, a most elaborate piece of cabinet and inlaid work, while Lucien Debray, standing before a small work table, was turning over the pages of an album. Lucien had found time, preparatory to the Count's arrival, to relate many particulars respecting him to Madame Danglars. It will be remembered that Monte Cristo had made a lively impression on the minds of all the party assembled at the breakfast given by Albert de Morcerf, and although Debray was not in the habit of yielding to such feelings, He had never been able to shake off the powerful influence excited in his mind by the impressive look and manner of the Count. Consequently, the description given by Lucian to the Baroness bore the highly colored tinge of his own heated imagination. Already excited by the wonderful stories related of the Count by de Morcerf, it is no wonder that Madame Danglars eagerly listened to, and fully credited, all the additional circumstances detailed by Debray. This posing at the piano and over the album was only a little ruse adopted by way of precaution. A most gracious welcome and unusual smile were bestowed on M. Danglars. The Count, in return for his gentlemanly bow, received a formal though graceful courtesy, while Lucian exchanged with the Count a sort of distant recognition, and with Danglars a free and easy nod. "Baroness," said Danglars, "give me leave to present to you the Count of Monte Cristo, who has been most warmly recommended to me by my correspondents at Rome. I need but mention one fact to make all the ladies in Paris court his notice, and that is, that he has come to take up his abode in Paris for a year, during which brief period he proposes to spend 6 millions of money. That means balls, dinners, and lawn parties without end, in all of which I trust the Count will remember us, as he may depend upon it we shall him, in our own humble entertainments." In spite of the gross flattery and coarseness of this address, Madame Danglars could not forbear gazing with considerable interest on a man capable of expending 6 millions in 12 months, and who had selected Paris for the scene of his princely extravagance. "And when did you arrive here?" inquired she. "Yesterday morning, madame, coming, as usual, I presume, from the extreme end of the globe. Pardon me, at least, such I have heard is your custom." "Nay, madame. This time I have merely come from Cadiz." "You have selected a most unfavorable moment for your first visit. Paris is a horrible place in summer. Balls, parties, and fêtes are over. The Italian opera is in London, the French opera everywhere except in Paris. As for the Théâtre Français, you know, of course, that it is nowhere. The only amusements left us are the indifferent races at the Champ de Mars and Sattery." "Do you propose entering any horses at either of these races, Count?" "I shall do whatever they do at Paris, madame, if I have the good fortune to find someone who will initiate me into the prevalent ideas of amusement. Are you fond of horses, Count?" "I have passed a considerable part of my life in the East, madame, and you are doubtless aware that the Orientals value only 2 things: the fine breeding of their horses and the beauty of their women." "Nay, Count," said the Baroness, "it would have been somewhat more gallant to have placed the ladies first. You see, madame, how rightly I spoke when I said I required a preceptor to guide me in all my sayings and doings here." At this instant, the favorite attendant of Madame Danglars entered the boudoir. Approaching her mistress, she spoke some words in an undertone. Madame Danglars turned very pale, then exclaimed, "I cannot believe it, the thing is impossible." "I assure you, madame," replied the woman, "it is as I have said." Turning impatiently towards her husband, Madame Danglars demanded, "Is this true?" "Is what true, madame?" inquired Danglars, visibly agitated. "What my maid tells me." "But what does she tell you?" "That when my coachman was about to harness the horses to my carriage, he discovered that they had been removed from the stables without his knowledge." "I desire to know what is the meaning of this." "Be kind enough, madame, to listen to me," said Danglars. "Oh, yes, I will listen, monsieur, for I am most curious to hear what explanation you will give. These 2 gentlemen shall decide between us, but first I will state the case to them. Gentlemen," continued the Baroness, "among the 10 horses in the stables of Baron Danglars are 2 that belong exclusively to me, a pair of the handsomest and most spirited creatures to be found in Paris. But to you, at least, M. Debray, I need not give a further description, because to you my beautiful pair of dappled grays were well known. Well, I had promised Madame de Villefort the loan of my carriage to drive tomorrow to the boys, but when my coachman goes to fetch the grays from the stables, they are gone, positively gone. No doubt M. Danglars has sacrificed them to the selfish consideration of gaining some thousands of paltry francs." Oh, what a detestable crew they are, these mercenary speculators. Madame, replied Danglars, the horses were not sufficiently quiet for you. They were scarcely 4 years old, and they made me extremely uneasy on your account. Nonsense, retorted the Baroness. You could not have entertained any alarm on the subject, because you are perfectly well aware that I have had for a month in my service the very best coachman in Paris. But perhaps you have disposed of the coachman as well as the horses. My dear love, pray do not say any more about them, and I promise you another pair exactly like them in appearance, only more quiet and steady. The Baroness shrugged her shoulders with an air of ineffable contempt, while her husband, affecting not to observe this unconjugal gesture, turned towards Monte Cristo and said, "Upon my word, Count, I am quite sorry not to have met you sooner. You are setting up an establishment, of course." "Why, yes," replied the Count. "I should have liked to have made you the offer of these horses. I have almost given them away as it is, but, as I before said, I was anxious to get rid of them upon any terms. They were only fit for a young man. I am much obliged by your kind intentions towards me," said Monte Cristo, "but this morning I purchased a very excellent pair of carriage horses, and I do not think they were dear. There they are. Come, M. Debray, you are a connoisseur, I believe. Let me have your opinion upon them." As Debray walked towards the window, Danglars approached his wife. "I could not tell you before others," said he in a low tone, "the reason of my parting with the horses, but a most enormous price was offered me this morning for them. Some madman or fool, bent upon ruining himself as fast as he can, actually sent his steward to me to purchase them at any cost, and the fact is, I have gained 16,000 francs by the sale of them. Come, Dantès looks so angry, and you shall have 4,000 francs of the money to do what you like with, and Huguenot shall have 2,000. There, what do you think now of the affair? Wassenty I write to part with the horses." Madame Danglars surveyed her husband with a look of withering contempt. "Great heavens!" suddenly exclaimed Debray. "What is it?" asked the Baroness. "I cannot be mistaken, there are your horses." "The very animals we were speaking of, harnessed to the Countess' carriage. My dappled greys," demanded the Baroness, springing to the window. "'Tis indeed they," said she. Danglars looked absolutely stupefied. "How very singular!" cried Monte Cristo with well-feigned astonishment. "I cannot believe it," murmured the banker. Madame Danglars whispered a few words in the ear of Debray, who approached Monte Cristo, saying, "The Baroness wishes to know what you paid her husband for the horses." "I scarcely know," replied the Count. "It was a little surprise prepared for me by my steward, and cost me well, somewhere about 30,000 francs. Debray conveyed the Countess' reply to the Baroness. Poor Danglars looked so crestfallen and discomfited that Monte Cristo assumed a pitying air towards him. "See," said the Count, "how very ungrateful women are. Your kind attention, in providing for the safety of the Baroness by disposing of the horses, does not seem to have made the least impression on her. But so it is. A woman will often, from mere willfulness, prefer that which is dangerous to that which is safe. Therefore, in my opinion, my dear Baron, the best and easiest way is to leave them to their fancies, and allow them to act as they please, and then, if any mischief follows, why, at least, they have no one to blame but themselves." Danglars made no reply. He was occupied in anticipations of the coming scene between himself and the Baroness, whose frowning brow, like that of Olympic Jove, predicted a storm. Debray, who perceived the gathering clouds, and felt no desire to witness the explosion of Madame Danglars' rage, suddenly recollected an appointment, which compelled him to take his leave, while Monte Cristo, unwilling by prolonging his stay to destroy the advantages he hoped to obtain, made a farewell bow and departed, leaving Danglars to endure the angry reproaches of his wife. "Excellent," murmured Monte Cristo to himself, as he came away. "All has gone according to my wishes. The domestic peace of this family is henceforth in my hands. Now then to play another masterstroke, by which I shall gain the heart of both husband and wife delightful. Still, added he, amid all this, I have not yet been presented to Mademoiselle Eugne Danglars, whose acquaintance I should have been glad to make. But he went on with his peculiar smile, I am here in Paris, and have plenty of time before me. By and by will do for that. With these reflections he entered his carriage and returned home. 2 hours afterwards, Madame Danglars received a most flattering epistle from the Count, in which he entreated her to receive back her favorite dappled grays, protesting that he could not endure the idea of making his entry into the Parisian world of fashion, with the knowledge that his splendid equipage had been obtained at the price of a lovely woman's regrets. The horses were sent back wearing the same harness she had seen on them in the morning, only, by the Countess' orders, in the center of each rosette that adorned either side of their heads, had been fastened a large diamond. To Danglars Monte Cristo also wrote, requesting him to excuse the whimsical gift of a capricious millionaire, and to beg the Baroness to pardon the Eastern fashion adopted in the return of the horses. During the evening, Monte Cristo quitted Paris for Auteuil, accompanied by Ali. The following day, about 3 o'clock, a single blow struck on the gong summoned Ali to the presence of the Count. Ali observed his master, as the Nubian entered the chamber, "You have frequently explained to me how more than commonly skillful you are in throwing the lasso, have you not?" Ali drew himself up proudly and then returned a sign in the affirmative. "I thought I did not mistake. With your lasso you could stop an ox." Again Ali repeated his affirmative gesture. "Or a tiger." Ali bowed his head in token of assent. "A lion even." Ali sprung forwards, imitating the action of one throwing the lasso, then of a strangled lion. "I understand," said Monte Cristo. "You wish to tell me you have hunted the lion." Ali smiled with triumphant pride as he signified that he had indeed both chased and captured many lions. "But do you believe you could arrest the progress of 2 horses rushing forwards with ungovernable fury?" The Nubian smiled. "It is well," said Monte Cristo. "Then listen to me. Ere long a carriage will dash past here, drawn by the pair of dappled gray horses you saw me with yesterday. Now, at the risk of your own life, you must manage to stop those horses before my door." Ali descended to the street, and marked a straight line on the pavement immediately at the entrance of the house, and then pointed out the line he had traced to the Count, who was watching him. The Count patted him gently on the shoulder, his usual mode of praising Ali, who, pleased and gratified with the commission assigned him, walked calmly towards a projecting stone forming the angle of the street and house, and seating himself thereon, began to smoke his chibouque, while Monte Cristo re-entered his dwelling, perfectly assured of the success of his plan. Still, as 5 o'clock approached, and the carriage was momentarily expected by the Count, the indication of more than common impatience and uneasiness might be observed in his manner. He stationed himself in a room commanding a view of the street, packing the chamber with restless steps, stopping merely to listen from time to time for the sound of approaching wheels, then to cast an anxious glance on Ali. But the regularity with which the Nubian puffed forth the smoke of his chibouque proved that he at least was wholly absorbed in the enjoyment of his favorite occupation. Suddenly a distant sound of rapidly advancing wheels was heard, and almost immediately a carriage appeared, drawn by a pair of wild, ungovernable horses, while the terrified coachman strove in vain to restrain their furious speed. In the vehicle was a young woman and a child of about 7 or 8 clasped in each other's arms. Terror seemed to have deprived them even of the power of uttering a cry. The carriage creaked and rattled as it flew over the rough stones, and the slightest obstacle under the wheels would have caused disaster. But it kept on in the middle of the road, and those who saw it pass uttered cries of terror. Ali suddenly cast aside his chibouque, drew the lasso from his pocket, threw it so skillfully as to catch the forelegs of the near horse in its triple fold, and suffered himself to be dragged on for a few steps by the violence of the shock, Then the animal fell over on the pole, which snapped, and therefore prevented the other horse from pursuing its way. Gladly availing himself of this opportunity, the coachman leaped from his box, but Ali had promptly seized the nostrils of the second horse and held them in his iron grasp, till the beast, snorting with pain, sunk beside his companion. All this was achieved in much less time than is occupied in the recital. The brief space had, however, been sufficient for a man, followed by a number of servants, to rush from the house before which the accident had occurred, and as the coachman opened the door of the carriage, to take from it a lady who was convulsively grasping the cushions with one hand, while with the other she pressed to her bosom the young boy, who had lost consciousness. Monte Cristo carried them both to the salon and deposited them on a sofa. "Compose yourself, madame," said he. "All danger is over." The woman looked up at these words, and with a glance far more expressive than any entreaties could have been, pointed to her child, who still continued insensible. "I understand the nature of your alarms, madame," said the Count, carefully examining the child, "but I assure you there is not the slightest occasion for uneasiness. Your little charge has not received the least injury. His insensibility is merely the effects of terror, and will soon pass. Are you quite sure you do not say so to tranquilize my fears? See how deadly pale he is. My child, my darling Edward, speak to your mother. Open your dear eyes and look on me once again. Oh, sir, in pity send for a physician. My whole fortune shall not be thought too much for the recovery of my boy." With a calm smile and a gentle wave of the hand, Monte Cristo signed to the distracted mother to lay aside her apprehensions. Then, opening a casket that stood near, he drew forth a phial of Bohemian glass encrusted with gold, containing a liquid of the color of blood, of which he let fall a single drop on the child's lips. Scarcely had it reached them, ere the boy, though still pale as marble, opened his eyes and eagerly gazed around him. At this, the delight of the mother was almost frantic. "Where am I?" exclaimed she, "and to whom am I indebted for so happy a termination to my late dreadful alarm?" "Madame," answered the Count, "you are under the roof of one who esteems himself most fortunate in having been able to save you from a further continuance of your sufferings." "My wretched curiosity has brought all this about," pursued the lady. "All Paris rung with the praises of Madame Danglars' beautiful horses, and I had the folly to desire to know whether they really merited the high praise given to them." "Is it possible," exclaimed the Count with well-feigned astonishment, "that these horses belong to the Baroness?" "They do, indeed." "May I inquire if you are acquainted with Madame Danglars?" "I have that honor, and my happiness at your escape from the danger that threatened you is redoubled by the consciousness that I have been the unwilling and the unintentional cause of all the peril you have incurred. I yesterday purchased these horses of the Baron, but as the Baroness evidently regretted parting with them, I ventured to send them back to her, with a request that she would gratify me by accepting them from my hands. You are, then, doubtless, the Count of Monte Cristo, of whom Hermann has talked to me so much." "You have rightly guessed, madame," replied the Count. "And I am Madame Héloïse de Villefort." The Count bowed with the air of a person who hears a name for the first time. "How grateful will M. de Villefort be for all your goodness! How thankfully will he acknowledge that to you alone he owes the existence of his wife and child!" "Most certainly, but for the prompt assistance of your intrepid servant, this dear child and myself must both have perished. Indeed, I still shudder at the fearful danger you were placed in. I trust you will allow me to recompense worthily the devotion of your man." "I beseech you, madame," replied Monte Cristo, "not to spoil Ali, either by too great praise or rewards. I cannot allow him to acquire the habit of expecting to be recompensed for every trifling service he may render. Ali is my slave, and in saving your life he was but discharging his duty to me." "Nay," interposed Madame de Villefort, on whom the authoritative style adopted by the Count made a deep impression, "nay, but consider that to preserve my life he has risked his own." "His life, madame, belongs not to him. It is mine, in return for my having myself saved him from death." Madame de Villefort made no further reply. Her mind was utterly absorbed in the contemplation of the person who, from the first instant she saw him, had made so powerful an impression on her. During the evident preoccupation of Madame de Villefort, Monte Cristo scrutinized the features and appearance of the boy she kept folded in her arms, lavishing on him the most tender endearments. The child was small for his age and unnaturally pale. A mass of straight black hair, defying all attempts to train or curl it, fell over his projecting forehead and hung down to his shoulders, giving increased vivacity to eyes already sparkling with a youthful love of mischief and fondness for every forbidden enjoyment. His mouth was large, and the lips, which had not yet regained their color, were particularly thin. In fact, the deep and crafty look, giving a predominant expression to the child's face, belonged rather to a boy of 12 or 14 than to one so young. His first movement was to free himself by a violent push from the encircling arms of his mother, and to rush forward to the casket, from whence the Count had taken the phial of elixir. Then, without asking permission of anyone, he proceeded, in all the willfulness of a spoiled child unaccustomed to restrain either whims or caprices, to pull the corks out of all the bottles. "Touch nothing, my little friend," cried the Count eagerly. "Some of those liquids are not only dangerous to taste, but even to inhale." Madame de Villefort became very pale and, seizing her son's arm, drew him anxiously toward her, but once satisfied of his safety, she also cast a brief but expressive glance on the casket, which was not lost upon the Count. At this moment Ali entered. At sight of him, Madame de Villefort uttered an expression of pleasure, and holding the child still closer towards her, she said, "Edward, dearest, do you see that good man? He has shown very great courage and resolution, for he exposed his own life to stop the horses that were running away with us, and would certainly have dashed the carriage to pieces. Thank him then, my child, in your very best manner, for had he not come to our aid, neither you nor I would have been alive to speak our thanks." The child stuck out his lips and turned away his head in a disdainful manner, saying, "He's too ugly." The Count smiled as if the child bade fair to realize his hopes, while Madame de Villefort reprimanded her son with a gentleness and moderation very far from conveying the least idea of a fault having been committed. "This lady," said the Count, speaking to Ali in the Arabic language, "is desirous that her son should thank you for saving both their lives, but the boy refuses, saying you are too ugly." Ali turned his intelligent countenance towards the boy, on whom he gazed without any apparent emotion, but the spasmodic working of the nostrils showed to the practiced eye of Monte Cristo that the Arab had been wounded to the heart. "Will you permit me to inquire," said Madame de Villefort, as she arose to take her leave, "whether you usually reside here?" "No, I do not," replied Monte Cristo. "It is a small place I have purchased quite lately. My place of abode is No. 30, Avenue des Champs-Élysées, but I see you have quite recovered from your fright and are, no doubt, desirous of returning home. Anticipating your wishes, I have desired the same horses you came with to be put to one of my carriages, and Ali, he whom you think so very ugly," continued he, addressing the boy with a smiling air, "will have the honor of driving you home, while your coachman remains here to attend to the necessary repairs of your calash. As soon as that important business is concluded, I will have a pair of my own horses harnessed to convey it direct to Madame Danglars." "I dare not return with those dreadful horses," said Madame de Villefort. "You will see," replied Monte Cristo, "that they will be as different as possible in the hands of Ali. With him they will be gentle and docile as lambs." Ali had indeed given proof of this, for, approaching the animals, who had been got upon their legs with considerable difficulty, he rubbed their foreheads and nostrils with a sponge soaked in aromatic vinegar, and wiped off the sweat and foam that covered their mouths. Then, commencing a loud whistling noise, he rubbed them well all over their bodies for several minutes. Then, undisturbed by the noisy crowd collected round the broken carriage, Ali quietly harnessed the pacified animals to the Count's chariot, took the reins in his hands, and mounted the box, when to the utter astonishment of those who had witnessed the ungovernable spirit and maddened speed of the same horses, he was actually compelled to apply his whip in no very gentle manner before he could induce them to start. And even then all that could be obtained from the celebrated dappled greys, now changed into a couple of dull, sluggish, stupid brutes, was a slow, pottering pace, kept up with so much difficulty that Madame de Villefort was more than 2 hours returning to her residence in the Faubourg Saint-Honor. Scarcely had the first congratulations upon her marvelous escape been gone through when she wrote the following letter to Madame Danglars. Dear Herman, I have just had a wonderful escape from the most imminent danger, and I owe my safety to the very Count of Monte Cristo we were talking about yesterday, but whom I little expected to see today. I remember how unmercifully I laughed at what I considered your eulogistic and exaggerated praises of him, but I have now ample cause to admit that your enthusiastic description of this wonderful man fell far short of his merits. Your horses got as far as Rainlog, when they darted forward like mad things, and galloped away at so fearful a rate, that there seemed no other prospect for myself and my poor Edward but that of being dashed to pieces against the first object that impeded their progress, when a strange-looking man, an Arab, a Negro, or a Nubian, at least a black of some nation or other at a signal from the Count, whose domestic he is, suddenly seized and stopped the infuriated animals, even at the risk of being trampled to death himself, and certainly he must have had a most wonderful escape. The Count then hastened to us, and took us into his house, where he speedily recalled my poor Edward to life. He sent us home in his own carriage. Yours will be returned to you tomorrow. You will find your horses in bad condition, from the results of this accident. They seem thoroughly stupefied, as if sulky and vexed at having been conquered by man. The Count, however, has commissioned me to assure you that 2 or 3 days' rest, with plenty of barley for their sole food during that time, will bring them back to as fine, that is, as terrifying, a condition as they were in yesterday. Adieu. I cannot return you many thanks for the drive of yesterday. But after all, I ought not to blame you for the misconduct of your horses, more especially as it procured me the pleasure of an introduction to the Count of Monte Cristo, and certainly that illustrious personage, apart from the millions he is said to be so very anxious to dispose of, seemed to me one of those curiously interesting problems I, for one, delight in solving at any risk, even if it were to necessitate another drive to the boys behind your horses. Edward endured the accident with miraculous courage. He did not utter a single cry, but fell lifeless into my arms, nor did a tear fall from his eyes after it was over. I doubt not you will consider these praises the result of blind maternal affection, but there is a soul of iron in that delicate, fragile body. Valentine sends many affectionate remembrances to your dear Huguenot. I embrace you with all my heart. H. Loce de Villefort. P.S. Do pray contrive some means for me to meet the Count of Monte Cristo at your house. I must and will see him again. I have just made M. de Villefort promise to call on him, and I hope the visit will be returned. That night the adventure at Auteuil was talked of everywhere. Albert related it to his mother. C.H. Tournaud recounted it at the Jockey Club, and Debray detailed it at length in the salons of the minister. Even Beauchamp accorded 20 lines in his journal to the relation of the Count's courage and gallantry, thereby celebrating him as the greatest hero of the day in the eyes of all the feminine members of the aristocracy. Vast was the crowd of visitors and inquiring friends who left their names at the residence of Madame de Villefort, with the design of renewing their visit at the right moment, of hearing from her lips all the interesting circumstances of this most romantic adventure. As for M. de Villefort, he fulfilled the predictions of H. Loce to the letter, donned his dress suit, drew on a pair of white gloves, ordered the servants to attend the carriage dressed in their full livery, and drove that same night to No. 30 in the Avenue des Champs-Élysées.
Chapter 48.
If the Count of Monte Cristo had been for a long time familiar with the ways of Parisian society, he would have appreciated better the significance of the step which M. de Villefort had taken. Standing well at court, whether the king regnant was of the older or younger branch, whether the government was doctrinaire liberal or conservative, looked upon by all as a man of talent, since those who have never experienced a political check are generally so regarded, hated by many but warmly supported by others, without being really liked by anybody. M. de Villefort held a high position in the magistracy, and maintained his eminence like a Harley or a Mall. His drawing-room, under the regenerating influence of a young wife and a daughter by his first marriage, scarcely 18, was still one of the well-regulated Paris salons, where the worship of traditional customs and the observance of rigid etiquette were carefully maintained. A freezing politeness, a strict fidelity to government principles, a profound contempt for theories and theorists, a deep-seated hatred of ideality, these were the elements of private and public life displayed by M. de Villefort. M. de Villefort was not only a magistrate, he was almost a diplomatist. His relations with the former court, of which he always spoke with dignity and respect, made him respected by the new one, and he knew so many things that not only was he always carefully considered, but sometimes consulted. Perhaps this would not have been so had it been possible to get rid of M. de Villefort, but, like the feudal barons who rebelled against their sovereign, he dwelt in an impregnable fortress. This fortress was his post as King's attorney, all the advantages of which he exploited with marvelous skill, and which he would not have resigned but to be made deputy, and thus to replace neutrality by opposition. Ordinarily, M. de Villefort made and returned very few visits. His wife visited for him, and this was the received thing in the world, where the weighty and multifarious occupations of the magistrate were accepted as an excuse for what was really only calculated pride, a manifestation of professed superiority in fact, the application of the axiom, pretend to think well of yourself, and the world will think well of you, an axiom 100 times more useful in society nowadays than that of the Greeks, know thyself, a knowledge for which in our days we have substituted the less difficult and more advantageous science of knowing others. To his friends, M. de Villefort was a powerful protector. To his enemies, he was a silent but bitter opponent. For those who were neither the one nor the other, he was a statue of the law-made man. He had a haughty bearing, a look either steady and impenetrable or insolently piercing and inquisitorial. 4 successive revolutions had built and cemented the pedestal upon which his fortune was based. M. de Villefort had the reputation of being the least curious and the least wearisome man in France. He gave a ball every year, at which he appeared for a quarter of an hour only, that is to say, 45 minutes less than the king is visible at his balls. He was never seen at the theaters, at concerts, or in any place of public resort. Occasionally, but seldom, he played at whist, and then care was taken to select partners worthy of him. Sometimes they were ambassadors, sometimes archbishops, or sometimes a prince or a president or some dowager duchess. Such was the man whose carriage had just now stopped before the Count of Monte Cristo's door. The valet de chambre announced M. de Villefort at the moment when the Count, leaning over a large table, was tracing on a map the route from St. Petersburg to China. The procureur entered with the same grave and measured step he would have employed in entering a court of justice. He was the same man, or rather the development of the same man, whom we have heretofore seen as assistant attorney at Marseille. Nature, according to her way, had made no deviation in the path he had marked out for himself. From being slender he had now become meager. Once pale, he was now yellow. His deep-set eyes were hollow, and the gold spectacles shielding his eyes seemed to be an integral portion of his face. He dressed entirely in black, with the exception of his white tie, and his funeral appearance was only mitigated by the slight line of red ribbon which passed almost imperceptibly through his buttonhole, and appeared like a streak of blood traced with a delicate brush. Although master of himself, Monte Cristo scrutinized with irrepressible curiosity the magistrate whose salute he returned, and who, distrustful by habit and especially incredulous as to social prodigies, was much more despised to look upon the noble stranger, as Monte Cristo was already called, as an adventurer in search of new fields, or an escaped criminal, rather than as a prince of the Holy See, or a sultan of the 1,001 Nights. "Sir," said Villefort, in the squeaky tone assumed by magistrates in their oratorical periods, and of which they cannot, or will not, divest themselves in society, "Sir, the signal service which you yesterday rendered to my wife and son has made it a duty for me to offer you my thanks. I have come, therefore, to discharge this duty, and to express to you my overwhelming gratitude." And as he said this, the eye severe of the magistrate had lost nothing of its habitual arrogance. He spoke in a voice of the Procureur General, with the rigid inflexibility of neck and shoulders which caused his flatterers to say, as we have before observed, that he was the living statue of the law. "Monsieur," replied the Count, with a chilling air, "I am very happy to have been the means of preserving a son to his mother, for they say that the sentiment of maternity is the most holy of all, and the good fortune which occurred to me, monsieur, might have enabled you to dispense with a duty which, in its discharge, confers an undoubtedly great honor, for I am aware that M. de Villefort is not usually lavish of the favor which he now bestows on me, a favor which, however estimable, is unequal to the satisfaction which I have in my own consciousness." Villefort, astonished at this reply, which he by no means expected, started like a soldier who feels the blow leveled at him over the armor he wears, and a curl of his disdainful lip indicated that from that moment he noted in the tablets of his brain that the Count of Monte Cristo was by no means a highly bred gentleman. He glanced around, in order to seize on something on which the conversation might turn, and seemed to fall easily on a topic. He saw the map which Monte Cristo had been examining when he entered, and said, "You seem geographically engaged, sir. It is a rich study for you, who, as I learn, have seen as many lands as are delineated on this map." "Yes, sir," replied the Count. "I have sought to make of the human race, taken in the mass, what you practice every day on individuals of physiological study. I have believed it was much easier to descend from the whole to a part than to ascend from a part to the whole. It is an algebraic axiom which makes us proceed from a known to an unknown quantity, and not from an unknown to a known. But sit down, sir, I beg of you." Monte Cristo pointed to a chair, which the Procureur was obliged to take the trouble to move forwards himself, while the Count merely fell back into his own, on which he had been kneeling when M. Villefort entered. Thus the Count was halfway turned towards his visitor, having his back towards the window, his elbow resting on the geographical chart which furnished the theme of conversation for the moment, a conversation which assumed, as in the case of the interviews with Danglars and Morcerf, a turn analogous to the persons, if not to the situation. "Ah, you philosophize," replied Villefort after a moment's silence, during which, like a wrestler who encounters a powerful opponent, he took breath. "Well, sir, really, if, like you, I had nothing else to do, I should seek a more amusing occupation." "Why, in truth, sir," was Monte Cristo's reply, "man is but an ugly caterpillar for him who studies him through a solar microscope. But you said, I think, that I had nothing else to do. Now, really, let me ask, sir, have you? Do you believe you have anything to do? Or to speak in plain terms, do you really think that what you do deserves being called anything?" Villefort's astonishment redoubled at this second thrust so forcibly made by his strange adversary. It was a long time since the magistrate had heard a paradox so strong, or rather, to say the truth more exactly, It was the first time he had ever heard of it. The procureur exerted himself to reply. "Sir," he responded, "you are a stranger, and I believe you say yourself that a portion of your life has been spent in Oriental countries, so you are not aware how human justice, so expeditious in barbarous countries, takes with us a prudent and well-studied course." "Oh, yes, yes, I do, sir. It is the pede claudo of the ancients. I know all that, for it is with the justice of all countries especially that I have occupied myself. It is with the criminal procedure of all nations that I have compared natural justice. And I must say, sir, that it is the law of primitive nations, that is, the law of retaliation, that I have most frequently found to be according to the law of God." "If this law were adopted, sir," said the procureur, "it would greatly simplify our legal codes, and in that case the magistrates would not, as you just observed, have much to do." "It may perhaps come to this in time," observed Monte Cristo. "You know that human inventions march from the complex to the simple, and simplicity is always perfection." "In the meanwhile," continued the magistrate, "our codes are in full force, with all their contradictory enactments derived from Gallic customs, Roman laws, and Frank usages. The knowledge of all which, you will agree, is not to be acquired without extended labor. It needs tedious study to acquire this knowledge, and when acquired, a strong power of brain to retain it." "I agree with you entirely, sir. But all that even you know with respect to the French code, I know, not only in reference to that code, but as regards the codes of all nations. The English, Turkish, Japanese, Hindu laws are as familiar to me as the French laws, and thus I was right when I said to you that relatively, you know that everything is relative, sir, that relatively to what I have done, you have very little to do, but that relatively to all I have learned, you have yet a great deal to learn." "But with what motive have you learned all this?" inquired Villefort in astonishment. Monte Cristo smiled. "Really, sir," he observed, "I see that in spite of the reputation which you have acquired as a superior man, you look at everything from the material and vulgar view of society, beginning with man, and ending with man, that is to say, in the most restricted, most narrow view which it is possible for human understanding to embrace." "Pray, sir, explain yourself," said Villefort, more and more astonished. "I really do not understand you perfectly." "I say, sir, that with the eyes fixed on the social organization of nations, you see only the springs of the machine, and lose sight of the sublime workman who makes them act. I say that you do not recognize before you and around you any but those office holders whose commissions have been signed by a minister or king, and that the men whom God has put above those office holders, ministers, and kings, by giving them a mission to follow out, instead of a post to fill, I say that they escape your narrow, limited field of observation. It is thus that human weakness fails, from its debilitated and imperfect organs. Tobias took the angel who restored him to light for an ordinary young man. The nations took Attila, who was doomed to destroy them, for a conqueror similar to other conquerors, and it was necessary for both to reveal their missions, that they might be known and acknowledged. One was compelled to say, "I am the angel of the Lord," and the other, "I am the hammer of God," in order that the divine essence in both might be revealed. "Then," said Villefort, more and more amazed, and really supposing he was speaking to a mystic or a madman, "you consider yourself as one of those extraordinary beings whom you have mentioned." "And why not?" said Monte Cristo coldly. "Your pardon, sir," replied Villefort, quite astounded, "but you will excuse me if, when I presented myself to you, I was unaware that I should meet with a person whose knowledge and understanding so far surpass the usual knowledge and understanding of men. It is not usual with us corrupted wretches of civilization to find gentlemen like yourself, possessors, as you are, of immense fortune at least, so it is said, and I beg you to observe that I do not inquire, I merely repeat. It is not usual, I say, for such privileged and wealthy beings to waste their time in speculations on the state of society, in philosophical reveries, intended at best to console those whom fate has disinherited from the goods of this world. Really, sir, retorted the Count, have you attained the eminent situation in which you are, without having admitted, or even without having met with exceptions? And do you never use your eyes, which must have acquired so much finesse and certainty, to divine, at a glance, the kind of man by whom you are confronted? Should not a magistrate be not merely the best administrator of the law, but the most crafty expounder of the chicanery of his profession, a steel probe to search hearts, a touchstone to try the gold which in each soul is mingled with more or less of alloy? Sir, said Villefort, upon my word, you overcome me. I really never heard a person speak as you do, because you remain eternally encircled in a round of general conditions, and have never dared to raise your wings into those upper spheres which God has peopled with invisible or exceptional beings. And you allow then, sir, that spheres exist, and that these marked and invisible beings mingle amongst us. Why should they not? Can you see the air you breathe, and yet without which you could not for a moment exist? Then we do not see those beings to whom you allude. Yes, we do. You see them whenever God pleases to allow them to assume a material form. You touch them, come in contact with them, speak to them, and they reply to you. Ah, said Villefort, smiling, I confess I should like to be warned when one of these beings is in contact with me. You have been served as you desire, monsieur, for you were warned just now, and I now again warn you. Then you yourself are one of these marked beings. Yes, monsieur, I believe so, for until now no man has found himself in a position similar to mine. The dominions of kings are limited either by mountains or rivers, or a change of manners, or an alteration of language. My kingdom is bounded only by the world, for I am not an Italian, or a Frenchman, or a Hindu, or an American, or a Spaniard. I am a cosmopolite. No country can say it saw my birth. God alone knows what country will see me die. I adopt all customs, speak all languages. You believe me to be a Frenchman, for I speak French with the same facility and purity as yourself. Well, Ali, my Nubian, believes me to be an Arab. Bertuccio, my steward, takes me for a Roman. Haid-E, my slave, thinks me a Greek. You may therefore comprehend that being of no country, asking no protection from any government, acknowledging no man as my brother, not one of the scruples that arrest the powerful, or the obstacles which paralyze the weak, paralyzes or arrests me. I have only two adversaries, I will not say two conquerors, for with perseverance I subdue even them. They are time and distance. There is a third, and the most terrible, that is my condition as a mortal being. This alone can stop me in my onward career, before I have attained the goal at which I aim, for all the rest I have reduced to mathematical terms. What men call the chances of fate, namely, ruin, change, circumstances, I have fully anticipated, and if any of these should overtake me, yet it will not overwhelm me. Unless I die, I shall always be what I am, and therefore it is that I utter the things you have never heard, even from the mouths of kings, for kings have need, and other persons have fear of you. For who is there who does not say to himself, in a society as incongruously organized as ours, perhaps some day I shall have to do with the king's attorney? But can you not say that, sir? The moment you become an inhabitant of France, you are naturally subjected to the French law. I know it, sir, replied Monte Cristo, but when I visit a country I begin to study, by all the means which are available, the men from whom I may have anything to hope or to fear, till I know them as well as, perhaps better than, they know themselves. It follows from this, that the king's attorney, be he who he may, with whom I should have to deal, would assuredly be more embarrassed than I should. That is to say, replied Villefort with hesitation, that human nature being weak, every man, according to your creed, has committed faults. Faults or crimes, responded Monte Cristo with a negligent air, and that you alone, amongst the men whom you do not recognize as your brothers, for you have said so, observed Villefort in a tone that faltered somewhat. You alone are perfect. No, not perfect, was the Countess' reply, only impenetrable, that's all. But let us leave off this strain, sir, if the tone of it is displeasing to you. I am no more disturbed by your justice than are you by my second sight. No, no, by no means, said Villefort, who was afraid of seeming to abandon his ground. No, by your brilliant and almost sublime conversation you have elevated me above the ordinary level. We no longer talk, we rise to dissertation. But you know how the theologians in their collegiate chairs and philosophers in their controversies occasionally say cruel truths. Let us suppose for the moment that we are theologizing in a social way or even philosophically, and I will say to you, rude as it may seem, my brother, you sacrifice greatly to pride. You may be above others, but above you there is God. Above us all, sir, was Monte Cristo's response, in a tone and with an emphasis so deep that Villefort involuntarily shuddered. I have my pride for men's serpents always ready to threaten everyone who would pass without crushing them underfoot. But I lay aside that pride before God, who has taken me from nothing to make me what I am. Then, Count, I admire you, said Villefort, who, for the first time in this strange conversation, used the aristocratic form to the unknown personage, whom, until now, he had only called Monsieur. Yes, and I say to you, if you are really strong, really superior, really pious or impenetrable, which you were right in saying amounts to the same thing, then be proud, sir, for that is the characteristic of predominance. Yet you have unquestionably some ambition. I have, sir. And what may it be? I too, as happens to every man once in his life, have been taken by Satan into the highest mountain in the earth, and when there he showed me all the kingdoms of the world, and as he said before, so said he to me, Child of earth, what wouldst thou have to make thee adore me? I reflected long, for a gnawing ambition had long preyed upon me, and then I replied, Listen, I have always heard of Providence, and yet I have never seen him, or anything that resembles him, or which can make me believe that he exists. I wish to be Providence myself, for I feel that the most beautiful, noblest, most sublime thing in the world is to recompense and punish. Satan bowed his head and groaned. You mistake, he said. Providence does exist, only you have never seen him, because the child of God is as invisible as the parent. You have seen nothing that resembles him, because he works by secret springs and moves by hidden ways. All I can do for you is to make you one of the agents of that providence. The bargain was concluded. I may sacrifice my soul, but what matters it? Added Monte Cristo, if the thing were to do again, I would again do it. Villefort looked at Monte Cristo with extreme amazement. Count, he inquired, have you any relations? No, sir, I am alone in the world, so much the worse. Why? Asked Monte Cristo. Because then you might witness a spectacle calculated to break down your pride. You say you fear nothing but death. I did not say that I feared it. I only said that death alone could check the execution of my plans, and old age. My end will be achieved before I grow old. And madness, I have been nearly mad, and you know the axiom non bis in idem. It is an axiom of criminal law, and consequently you understand its full application. Sir, continued Villefort, there is something to fear besides death, old age, and madness. For instance, there is apoplexy, that lightning stroke which strikes but does not destroy you, and yet which brings everything to an end. You are still yourself as now, and yet you are yourself no longer. You who, like Ariel, verge on the angelic, are but an inert mass, which, like Caliban, verges on the brutal. And this is called in human tongues, as I tell you, neither more nor less than apoplexy. Come, if so you will, Count, and continue this conversation at my house. Any day you may be willing to see an adversary capable of understanding and anxious to refute you, and I will show you my father, M. Noirtier de Villefort, one of the most fiery Jacobins of the French Revolution. That is to say, he had the most remarkable audacity, seconded by a most powerful organization, a man who has not perhaps, like yourself, seen all the kingdoms of the earth, but who has helped to overturn one of the greatest. In fact, a man who believed himself, like you, one of the envoys not of God, but of a supreme being, not of providence, but of fate. Well, sir, the rupture of a blood vessel on the lobe of the brain has destroyed all this, not in a day, not in an hour, but in a second. M. Noirtier, who, on the previous night, was the old Jacobin, the old senator, the old Carbonaro, laughing at the guillotine, the cannon, and the dagger. M. Noirtier playing with revolutions. M. Noirtier, for whom France was a vast chessboard, from which pawns, rooks, knights, and queens were to disappear, so that the king was checkmated. M. Noirtier, the redoubtable, was the next morning poor M. Noirtier, the helpless old man, at the tender mercies of the weakest creature in the household, that is, his grandchild, Valentine, a dumb and frozen carcass, in fact, living painlessly on. That time may be given for his frame to decompose without his consciousness of its decay. Alas, sir, said Monte Cristo, this spectacle is neither strange to my eye nor my thought. I am something of a physician, and have, like my fellows, sought more than once for the soul in living and in dead matter. Yet, like Providence, it has remained invisible to my eyes, although present to my heart. 100 writers since Socrates, Seneca, St. Augustine, and Gall have made, in verse and prose, the comparison you have made, and yet I can well understand that a father's sufferings may effect great changes in the mind of a son. I will call on you, sir, since you bid me contemplate, for the advantage of my pride, this terrible spectacle, which must have been so great a source of sorrow to your family. It would have been so unquestionably, had not God given me so large a compensation. In contrast with the old man who is dragging his way to the tomb, are 2 children just entering into life. Valentine, the daughter by my first wife, Mademoiselle Reine de Saint-Emran, and Edward, the boy whose life you have this day saved. And what is your deduction from this compensation, sir? Inquired Monte Cristo. My deduction is, replied Villefort, that my father, led away by his passions, has committed some fault unknown to human justice, but marked by the justice of God. That God, desirous in his mercy to punish but one person, has visited this justice on him alone. Monte Cristo, with a smile on his lips, uttered in the depths of his soul a groan which would have made Villefort fly had he but heard it. Adieu, sir, said the magistrate, who had risen from his seat. I leave you, bearing a remembrance of you, a remembrance of esteem, which I hope will not be disagreeable to you when you know me better. For I am not a man to bore my friends, as you will learn. Besides, you have made an eternal friend of Madame de Villefort. The Count bowed and contented himself with seeing Villefort to the door of his cabinet, the procureur being escorted to his carriage by 2 footmen, who, on a signal from their master, followed him with every mark of attention. When he had gone, Monte Cristo breathed a profound sigh and said, "Enough of this poison, let me now seek the antidote." Then sounding his bell, he said to Ali, who entered, "I am going to Madame's chamber. Have the carriage ready at 1 o'clock."
Chapter 49.
It will be recollected that the new, or rather old, acquaintances of the Count of Monte Cristo, residing in the Rue Meslay, were no other than Maximilian, Julie, and Emmanuel. The very anticipations of delight to be enjoyed in his forthcoming visits, the bright, pure gleam of heavenly happiness it diffused over the almost deadly warfare in which he had voluntarily engaged, illumined his whole countenance with a look of ineffable joy and calmness, as, immediately after Villefort's departure, his thoughts flew back to the cheering prospect before him, of tasting, at least, a brief respite from the fierce and stormy passions of his mind. Even Ali, who had hastened to obey the Count's summons, went forth from his master's presence in charmed amazement at the unusual animation and pleasure depicted on features ordinarily so stern and cold, while, as though dreading to put to flight the agreeable ideas hovering over his patron's meditations, whatever they were, the faithful Nubian walked on tiptoe towards the door, holding his breath, lest its faintest sound should dissipate his master's happy reverie. It was noon, and Monte Cristo had set apart 1 hour to be passed in the apartments of Haydée, as though his oppressed spirit could not all at once admit the feeling of pure and unmixed joy, but required a gradual succession of calm and gentle emotions to prepare his mind to receive full and perfect happiness, in the same manner as ordinary natures demand to be inured by degrees to the reception of strong or violent sensations. The young Greek, as we have already said, occupied apartments wholly unconnected with those of the Count. The rooms had been fitted up in strict accordance with Oriental ideas. The floors were covered with the richest carpets Turkey could produce. The walls hung with brocaded silk of the most magnificent designs and texture, while around each chamber luxurious divans were placed, with piles of soft and yielding cushions that needed only to be arranged at the pleasure or convenience of such as sought repose. Haydée had 3 French maids, and 1 who was a Greek. The first 3 remained constantly in a small waiting room, ready to obey the summons of a small golden bell, or to receive the orders of the Romaic slave, who knew just enough French to be able to transmit her mistress's wishes to the 3 other waiting women. The latter had received most peremptory instructions from Monte Cristo to treat Haydée with all the deference they would observe to a queen. The young girl herself generally passed her time in the chamber at the farther end of her apartments. This was a sort of boudoir, circular, and lighted only from the roof, which consisted of rose-colored glass. Haydée was reclining upon soft downy cushions, covered with blue satin spotted with silver. Her head, supported by one of her exquisitely molded arms, rested on the divan immediately behind her, while the other was employed in adjusting to her lips the coral tube of a rich narghileh, through whose flexible pipe she drew the smoke fragrant by its passage through perfumed water. Her attitude, though perfectly natural for an Eastern woman would, in a European, have been deemed too full of coquettish straining after effect. Her dress, which was that of the women of Epirus, consisted of a pair of white satin trousers, embroidered with pink roses, displaying feet so exquisitely formed and so delicately fair, that they might well have been taken for Parian marble, had not the eye been undeceived by their movements as they constantly shifted in and out of a pair of little slippers with upturned toes, beautifully ornamented with gold and pearls. She wore a blue and white striped vest, with long open sleeves, trimmed with silver loops and buttons of pearls, and a sort of bodice, which, closing only from the center to the waist, exhibited the whole of the ivory throat and upper part of the bosom. It was fastened with 3 magnificent diamond clasps. The junction of the bodice and drawers was entirely concealed by one of the many-colored scarves, whose brilliant hues and rich silken fringe have rendered them so precious in the eyes of Parisian belles. Tilted on one side of her head, she had a small cap of gold-colored silk, embroidered with pearls, while on the other a purple rose mingled its glowing colors with the luxuriant masses of her hair, of which the blackness was so intense that it was tinged with blue. The extreme beauty of the countenance that shone forth in loveliness that mocked the vain attempts of dress to augment it, was peculiarly and purely Grecian. There were the large, dark, melting eyes, the finely formed nose, the coral lips and pearly teeth that belonged to her race and country. And to complete the whole, Haydée was in the very springtide and fullness of youthful charms. She had not yet numbered more than 19 or 20 summers. Monte Cristo summoned the Greek attendant, and bade her inquire whether it would be agreeable to her mistress to receive his visit. Haydée's only reply was to direct her servant by a sign to withdraw the tapestried curtain that hung before the door of her boudoir, the framework of the opening thus made serving as a sort of border to the graceful tableau presented by the young girl's picturesque attitude and appearance. As Monte Cristo approached, she leaned upon the elbow of the arm that held the narghileh, and extending to him her other hand, said, with a smile of captivating sweetness, in the sonorous language spoken by the women of Athens and Sparta. Why demand permission ere you enter? Are you no longer my master, or have I ceased to be your slave? Monte Cristo returned her smile. Haid, said he, you well know. Why do you address me so coldly, so distantly? Asked the young Greek. Have I by any means displeased you? Oh, if so, punish me as you will, but do not speak to me in tones and manner so formal and constrained. Haid, replied the Count, you know that you are now in France and are free. Free to do what? Asked the young girl. Free to leave me, leave you. Why should I leave you? That is not for me to say, but we are now about to mix in society, to visit and be visited. I don't wish to see anybody but you. And should you see one whom you could prefer, I would not be so unjust. I have never seen anyone I preferred to you, and I have never loved anyone but you and my father. My poor child, replied Monte Cristo, that is merely because your father and myself are the only men who have ever talked to you. I don't want anybody else to talk to me. My father said I was his joy. You style me your love, and both of you have called me my child. Do you remember your father, Haid? The young Greek smiled. He is here and here, said she, touching her eyes and her heart. And where am I? Inquired Monte Cristo laughingly. You, cried she, with tones of thrilling tenderness, you are everywhere. Monte Cristo took the delicate hand of the young girl in his, and was about to raise it to his lips, when the simple child of nature hastily withdrew it, and presented her cheek. You now understand, Haid, said the Count, that from this moment you are absolutely free, that here you exercise unlimited sway, and are at liberty to lay aside or continue the costume of your country, as it may suit your inclination. Within this mansion you are absolute mistress of your actions, and may go abroad or remain in your apartments as may seem most agreeable to you. A carriage waits your orders, and Ali and Miatho will accompany you whithersoever you desire to go. There is but one favor I would entreat of you. Speak, guard carefully the secret of your birth, make no allusion to the past, nor upon any occasion be induced to pronounce the names of your illustrious father or ill-fated mother. I have already told you, my lord, that I shall see no one. It is possible, Haid, that so perfect a seclusion, though conformable with the habits and customs of the East, may not be practicable in Paris. Endeavor, then, to accustom yourself to our manner of living in these northern climes as you did to those of Rome, Florence, Milan, and Madrid. It may be useful to you one of these days, whether you remain here or return to the East. The young girl raised her tearful eyes towards Monte Cristo as she said with touching earnestness, whether we return to the East, you mean to say, my lord, do you not? My child, returned Monte Cristo, you know full well that whenever we part, it will be no fault or wish of mine. The tree forsakes not the flower falls from the tree. My lord, replied Haid, I never will leave you, for I am sure I could not exist without you. My poor girl, in 10 years I shall be old and you will be still young. My father had a long white beard, but I loved him. He was 60 years old, but to me he was handsomer than all the fine youths I saw. Then tell me, Haid, do you believe you shall be able to accustom yourself to our present mode of life? Shall I see you every day? Then what do you fear, my lord? You might find it dull. No, my lord. In the morning I shall rejoice in the prospect of your coming, and in the evening dwell with delight on the happiness I have enjoyed in your presence. Then too, when alone, I can call forth mighty pictures of the past, see vast horizons bounded only by the towering mountains of Pindus and Olympus. Oh, believe me, that when 3 great passions such as sorrow, love, and gratitude fill the heart, ennui can find no place. You are a worthy daughter of Epirus, Haid, and your charming and poetical ideas prove well your descent from that race of goddesses who claim your country as their birthplace. Depend on my care to see that your youth is not blighted or suffered to pass away in ungenial solitude, and of this be well assured, that if you love me as a father, I love you as a child. "You are wrong, my lord. The love I have for you is very different from the love I had for my father. My father died, but I did not die. If you were to die, I should die too." The Count, with a smile of profound tenderness, extended his hand, and she carried it to her lips. Monte Cristo, thus attuned to the interview he proposed to hold with Morrel and his family, departed, murmuring as he went these lines of Pindar: "Youth is a flower of which love is the fruit. Happy is he who, after having watched its silent growth, is permitted to gather and call it his own." The carriage was prepared according to orders, and stepping lightly into it, the Count drove off at his usual rapid pace.
Chapter 50.
In a very few minutes the Count reached No. 7 in the Rue Meslay. The house was of white stone, and in a small court before it were two small beds full of beautiful flowers. In the concierge that opened the gate the Count recognized Cockles, but as he had but one eye, and that eye had become somewhat dim in the course of 9 years, Cockles did not recognize the Count. The carriages that drove up to the door were compelled to turn, to avoid a fountain that played in a basin of rockwork, an ornament that had excited the jealousy of the whole quarter, and had gained for the place the appellation of the Little Versailles. It is needless to add that there were gold and silver fish in the basin. The house, with kitchens and cellars below, had above the ground floor 2 stories and attics. The whole of the property, consisting of an immense workshop, 2 pavilions at the bottom of the garden, and the garden itself, had been purchased by Emmanuel, who had seen at a glance that he could make of it a profitable speculation. He had reserved the house and half the garden, and building a wall between the garden and the workshops, had let them upon lease with the pavilions at the bottom of the garden. So that for a trifling sum he was as well lodged, and as perfectly shut out from observation, as the inhabitants of the finest mansion in the Faubourg Saint-Germain. The breakfast-room was finished in oak, the salon in mahogany, and the furnishings were of blue velvet. The bedroom was in citron wood and green damask. There was a study for Emmanuel, who never studied, and a music-room for Julie, who never played. The whole of the second story was set apart for Maximilian. It was precisely similar to his sister's apartments, except that for the breakfast parlor he had a billiard room, where he received his friends. He was superintending the grooming of his horse, and smoking his cigar at the entrance of the garden, when the Count's carriage stopped at the gate. Cockles opened the gate, and Baptistin, springing from the box, inquired whether Monsieur and Madame Herbault and Monsieur Maximilian Morrel would see His Excellency the Count of Monte Cristo. "The Count of Monte Cristo," cried Morrel, throwing away his cigar and hastening to the carriage. "I should think we would see him." "Ah, 1,000 thanks, Count, for not having forgotten your promise." And the young officer shook the Count's hand so warmly that Monte Cristo could not be mistaken as to the sincerity of his joy, and he saw that he had been expected with impatience, and was received with pleasure. "Come, come," said Maximilian, "I will serve as your guide. Such a man as you are ought not to be introduced by a servant. My sister is in the garden plucking the dead roses. My brother is reading his 2 papers, La Presse and Les Débats, within 6 steps of her. For wherever you see Madame Herbault, you have only to look within a circle of 4 yards and you will find M. Emmanuel, and reciprocally, as they say at the Polytechnic School." At the sound of their steps, a young woman of 20 to 25, dressed in a silk morning gown, and busily engaged in plucking the dead leaves off a noisette rose tree, raised her head. This was Julie, who had become, as the clerk of the house of Thomson and French had predicted, Madame Emmanuel Herbault. She uttered a cry of surprise at the sight of a stranger, and Maximilian began to laugh. "Don't disturb yourself, Julie," said he. "The Count has only been 2 or 3 days in Paris, but he already knows what a fashionable woman of the Marais is, and if he does not, you will show him." "Ah, monsieur," returned Julie, "it is treason in my brother to bring you thus, but he never has any regard for his poor sister." Penelon. An old man who was digging busily at one of the beds stuck his spade in the earth and approached, cap in hand, striving to conceal a quid of tobacco he had just thrust into his cheek. A few locks of gray mingled with his hair, which was still thick and matted, while his bronzed features and determined glance well suited an old sailor who had braved the heat of the equator and the storms of the tropics. "I think you hailed me, Mademoiselle Julie," said he. Penelon had still preserved the habit of calling his master's daughter Mademoiselle Julie, and had never been able to change the name to Madame Herbault. "Penelon," replied Julie, "go and inform M. a manual of this gentleman's visit, and Maximilian will conduct him to the salon." Then, turning to Monte Cristo, "I hope you will permit me to leave you for a few minutes," continued she, and without awaiting any reply, disappeared behind a clump of trees and escaped to the house by a lateral alley. "I am sorry to see," observed Monte Cristo to Morrel, "that I caused no small disturbance in your house." "Look there," said Maximilian, laughing. "There is her husband changing his jacket for a coat. I assure you, you are well known in the Rue Meslay." "Your family appears to be a very happy one," said the Count, as if speaking to himself. "Oh yes, I assure you, Count, they want nothing that can render them happy. They are young and cheerful, they are tenderly attached to each other, and with 25,000 francs a year they fancy themselves as rich as Rothschild." 25,000 francs is not a large sum, however," replied Monte Cristo, with a tone so sweet and gentle that it went to Maximilian's heart like the voice of a father. "But they will not be content with that. Your brother-in-law is a barrister, a doctor. He was a merchant, monsieur, and had succeeded to the business of my poor father, M. Morrel, at his death, left 500,000 francs, which were divided between my sister and myself, for we were his only children. Her husband, who, when he married her, had no other patrimony than his noble probity, his first-rate ability, and his spotless reputation, wished to possess as much as his wife. He labored and toiled until he had amassed 250,000 francs. 6 years sufficed to achieve this object. Oh, I assure you, sir, it was a touching spectacle to see these young creatures, destined by their talents for higher stations, toiling together, and through their unwillingness to change any of the customs of their paternal house, taking 6 years to accomplish what less scrupulous people would have effected in 2 or 3. Marseille resounded with their well-earned praises. At last, one day, Emmanuel came to his wife, who had just finished making up the accounts. "Julie," said he to her, "Cockles has just given me the last rouleau of 100 francs. That completes the 250,000 francs we had fixed as the limits of our gains. Can you content yourself with the small fortune which we shall possess for the future? Listen to me. Our house transacts business to the amount of 1,000,000 a year, from which we derive an income of 40,000 francs. We can dispose of the business, if we please, in an hour, for I have received a letter from M. Delaunay, in which he offers to purchase the goodwill of the house to unite with his own for 300,000 francs. Advise me what I had better do." "Emmanuel," returned my sister, "the house of Morrel can only be carried on by a Morrel. Is it not worth 300,000 francs to save our father's name from the chances of evil fortune and failure?" "I thought so," replied Emmanuel, "but I wish to have your advice. This is my counsel. Our accounts are made up and our bills paid. All we have to do is to stop the issue of any more and close our office." This was done instantly. It was 3 o'clock. At 1:15, a merchant presented himself to insure 2 ships. It was a clear profit of 15,000 francs. "Monsieur," said Emmanuel, "have the goodness to address yourself to M. Delaunay. Have quitted business." "How long?" inquired the astonished merchant. "A quarter of an hour," was the reply. "And this is the reason, monsieur," continued Maximilian, "of my sister and brother-in-law having only 25,000 francs a year." Maximilian had scarcely finished his story, during which the Count's heart had swelled within him, when Emmanuel entered wearing a hat and coat. He saluted the Count with the air of a man who is aware of the rank of his guest. Then, after having led Monte Cristo around the little garden, he returned to the house. A large vase of Japan porcelain, filled with flowers that loaded the air with their perfume, stood in the salon. Julie, suitably dressed, and her hair arranged, she had accomplished this feat in less than 10 minutes, received the Count on his entrance. The songs of the birds were heard in an aviary hard by, and the branches of laburnums and rose acacias formed an exquisite framework to the blue velvet curtains. Everything in this charming retreat, from the warble of the birds to the smile of the mistress, breathed tranquility and repose. The Count had felt the influence of this happiness from the moment he entered the house, and he remained silent and pensive, forgetting that he was expected to renew the conversation, which had ceased after the first salutations had been exchanged. The silence became almost painful when, by a violent effort, tearing himself from his pleasing reverie, "Madame," said he at length, "I pray you to excuse my emotion, which must astonish you who are only accustomed to the happiness I meet here. But contentment is so new a sight to me that I could never be weary of looking at yourself and your husband." "We are very happy, monsieur," replied Julie, "but we have also known unhappiness, and few have ever undergone more bitter sufferings than ourselves." The Countess' features displayed an expression of the most intense curiosity. "Oh, all this is a family history, as C.H. Torenaud told you the other day," observed Maximilian. "This humble picture would have but little interest for you, accustomed as you are to behold the pleasures and the misfortunes of the wealthy and industrious. But such as we are, we have experienced bitter sorrows. And God has poured balm into your wounds, as he does into those of all who are in affliction," said Monte Cristo inquiringly. "Yes, Count," returned Julie, "we may indeed say he has, for he has done for us what he grants only to his chosen. He sent us one of his angels." The Count's cheeks became scarlet, and he coughed, in order to have an excuse for putting his handkerchief to his mouth. "Those born to wealth, and who have the means of gratifying every wish," said Emmanuel, "know not what is the real happiness of life, just as those who have been tossed on the stormy waters of the ocean on a few frail planks can alone realize the blessings of fair weather." Monte Cristo rose, and without making any answer, for the tremulousness of his voice would have betrayed his emotion, walked up and down the apartment with a slow step. "Our magnificence makes you smile, Count," said Maximilian, who had followed him with his eyes. "No, no," returned Monte Cristo, pale as death, pressing one hand on his heart to still its throbbings, while with the other he pointed to a crystal cover, beneath which a silken purse lay on a black velvet cushion. "I was wondering what could be the significance of this purse, with the paper at one end and the large diamond at the other." "Count," replied Maximilian with an air of gravity, "those are our most precious family treasures." "The stone seems very brilliant," answered the Count. "Oh, my brother does not allude to its value, although it has been estimated at 100,000 francs. He means that the articles contained in this purse are the relics of the angel I spoke of just now. This I do not comprehend, and yet I may not ask for an explanation, madame," replied Monte Cristo, bowing. "Pardon me, I had no intention of committing an indiscretion." "Indiscretion? Oh, you make us happy by giving us an excuse for expatiating on this subject. If we wanted to conceal the noble action this purse commemorates, we should not expose it thus to view. Oh, would we could relate it everywhere, and to everyone, so that the emotion of our unknown benefactor might reveal his presence." "Ah, really," said Monte Cristo in a half-stifled voice. "Monsieur," returned Maximilian, raising the glass cover, and respectfully kissing the silken purse, "this has touched the hand of a man who saved my father from suicide, us from ruin, and our name from shame and disgrace, a man by whose matchless benevolence we poor children, doomed to want and wretchedness, can at present hear everyone envying our happy lot. This letter, as he spoke, Maximilian drew a letter from the purse and gave it to the Count. This letter was written by him the day that my father had taken a desperate resolution, and this diamond was given by the generous unknown to my sister as her dowry. Monte Cristo opened the letter and read it with an indescribable feeling of delight. It was the letter written, as our readers know, to Julie, and signed Sinbad the Sailor. Unknown, you say, is the man who rendered you this service unknown to you. Yes, we have never had the happiness of pressing his hand, continued Maximilian. We have supplicated heaven in vain to grant us this favor, but the whole affair has had a mysterious meaning that we cannot comprehend. We have been guided by an invisible hand, a hand as powerful as that of an enchanter. Oh, cried Julie, I have not lost all hope of some day kissing that hand, as I now kiss the purse which he has touched. 4 years ago, Penelon was at Trieste. Penelon, Count, is the old sailor you saw in the garden, and who, from quartermaster, has become gardener. Penelon, when he was at Trieste, saw on the quay an Englishman who was on the point of embarking on board a yacht, and he recognized him as the person who called on my father the 5th of June, 1829, and who wrote me this letter on the 5th of September. He felt convinced of his identity, but he did not venture to address him. An Englishman, said Monte Cristo, who grew uneasy at the attention with which Julie looked at him. An Englishman, you say? Yes, replied Maximilian, an Englishman who represented himself as the confidential clerk of the house of Thomson and French, at Rome. It was this that made me start when you said the other day, at M. de Morcerf's, that Messrs. Thomson and French were your bankers. That happened, as I told you, in 1829. For God's sake, tell me, did you know this Englishman? But you tell me also that the house of Thomson and French have constantly denied having rendered you this service. Yes. Then is it not probable that this Englishman may be someone who, grateful for a kindness your father had shown him, and which he himself had forgotten, has taken this method of requiting the obligation? Everything is possible in this affair, even a miracle. What was his name? Asked Monte Cristo. He gave no other name, answered Julie, looking earnestly at the Count, than that at the end of his letter Sinbad the Sailor, which is evidently not his real name but a fictitious one. Then, noticing that Julie was struck with the sound of his voice, tell me, continued he, was he not about my height, perhaps a little taller, with his chin imprisoned, as it were, in a high cravat, his coat closely buttoned up and constantly taking out his pencil? Oh, do you then know him? Cried Julie, whose eyes sparkled with joy. No, returned Monte Cristo, I only guessed. I knew a Lord Wilmore who was constantly doing actions of this kind, without revealing himself. He was an eccentric being and did not believe in the existence of gratitude. Oh, heaven, exclaimed Julie, clasping her hands, in what did he believe then? He did not credit it at the period which I knew him, said Monte Cristo, touched to the heart by the accents of Julie's voice. But perhaps, since then he has had proofs that gratitude does exist. And do you know this gentleman, monsieur? Inquired Emmanuel. Oh, if you do know him, cried Julie, can you tell us where he is, where we can find him? Maximilian Emmanuel, if we do but discover him, he must believe in the gratitude of the heart. Monte Cristo felt tears start into his eyes, and he again walked hastily up and down the room. In the name of heaven, said Maximilian, if you know anything of him, tell us what it is. Alas, cried Monte Cristo, striving to repress his emotion, if Lord Wilmore was your unknown benefactor, I fear you will never see him again. I parted from him 2 years ago at Palermo, and he was then on the point of setting out for the most remote regions, so that I fear he will never return. Oh, monsieur, this is cruel of you, said Julie, much affected, and the young lady's eyes swam with tears. Madame, replied Monte Cristo gravely, and gazing earnestly on the 2 liquid pearls that trickled down Julie's cheeks, had Lord Wilmore seen what I now see, he would become attached to life, for the tears you shed would reconcile him to mankind. And he held out his hand to Julie, who gave him hers, carried away by the look and accent of the Count. But continued she, Lord Wilmore had a family or friends. He must have known someone, can we not? Oh, it is useless to inquire, returned the Count. Perhaps, after all, he was not the man you seek for. He was my friend. He had no secrets from me, and if this had been so, he would have confided in me. And he told you nothing, not a word, nothing that would lead you to suppose. Nothing, and yet you spoke of him at once. Ah, in such a case one supposes sister, said Maximilian, coming to the Countess' aid. Monsieur is quite right. Recollect what our excellent father so often told us. It was no Englishman that thus saved us. Monte Cristo started. What did your father tell you, M? Moral, said he eagerly. My father thought that this action had been miraculously performed. He believed that a benefactor had arisen from the grave to save us. Oh, it was a touching superstition, monsieur, and although I did not myself believe it, I would not for the world have destroyed my father's faith. How often did he muse over it and pronounce the name of a dear friend, a friend lost to him forever. And on his deathbed, when the near approach of eternity seemed to have illumined his mind with supernatural light, this thought, which had until then been but a doubt, became a conviction, and his last words were, Maximilian, it was Edmond Dantès. At these words the Countess' paleness, which had for some time been increasing, became alarming. He could not speak. He looked at his watch like a man who has forgotten the hour, said a few hurried words to Madame Herbault, and pressing the hands of Emmanuel and Maximilian, Madame, said he, I trust you will allow me to visit you occasionally. I value your friendship and feel grateful to you for your welcome, for this is the first time for many years that I have thus yielded to my feelings. And he hastily quitted the apartment. This Count of Monte Cristo is a strange man, said Emmanuel. Yes, answered Maximilian, but I feel sure he has an excellent heart and that he likes us. His voice went to my heart, observed Julie, and 2 or 3 times I fancied that I had heard it before.
Chapter 51.
About 2/3 of the way along the Faubourg Saint-Honor, and in the rear of one of the most imposing mansions in this rich neighborhood, where the various houses vie with each other for elegance of design and magnificence of construction, extended a large garden, where the wide-spreading chestnut trees raised their heads high above the walls in a solid rampart. And with the coming of every spring, scattered a shower of delicate pink and white blossoms into the large stone vases that stood upon the 2 square pilasters of a curiously wrought iron gate that dated from the time of Louis XIII. This noble entrance, however, in spite of its striking appearance and the graceful effect of the geraniums planted in the 2 vases, as they waved their variegated leaves in the wind and charmed the eye with their scarlet bloom, had fallen into utter disuse. The proprietors of the mansion had many years before thought it best to confine themselves to the possession of the house itself, with its thickly planted courtyard, opening into the Faubourg Saint-Honor, and to the garden shut in by this gate, which formerly communicated with a fine kitchen garden of about an acre. For the demon of speculation drew a line, or in other words projected a street, at the farther side of the kitchen garden. The street was laid out. A name was chosen and posted up on an iron plate, but before construction was begun, it occurred to the possessor of the property that a handsome sum might be obtained for the ground, then devoted to fruits and vegetables, by building along the line of the proposed street, and so making it a branch of communication with the Faubourg Saint-Honor itself, one of the most important thoroughfares in the city of Paris. In matters of speculation, however, though man proposes, yet money disposes. From some such difficulty, the newly named street died almost in birth, and the purchaser of the kitchen garden, having paid a high price for it, and being quite unable to find anyone willing to take his bargain off his hands without a considerable loss, yet still clinging to the belief that at some future day he should obtain a sum for it that would repay him, not only for his past outlay, but also the interest upon the capital locked up in his new acquisition. Contented himself with letting the ground temporarily to some market gardeners, at a yearly rental of 500 francs. And so, as we have said, the iron gate leading into the kitchen garden had been closed up and left to the rust, which bade fair before long to eat off its hinges, while to prevent the ignoble glances of the diggers and delvers of the ground from presuming to sully the aristocratic enclosure belonging to the mansion, the gate had been boarded up to a height of 6 feet. True, the planks were not so closely adjusted, but that a hasty peep might be obtained through their interstices. But the strict decorum and rigid propriety of the inhabitants of the house left no grounds for apprehending that advantage would be taken of that circumstance. Horticulture seemed, however, to have been abandoned in the deserted kitchen garden, and where cabbages, carrots, radishes, peas, and melons had once flourished, a scanty crop of lucerne alone bore evidence of its being deemed worthy of cultivation. A small, low door gave egress from the walled space we have been describing into the projected street, the ground having been abandoned as unproductive by its various renters, and had now fallen so completely in general estimation as to return not even the 0.5% it had originally paid. Towards the house the chestnut trees we have before mentioned rose high above the wall, without in any way affecting the growth of other luxuriant shrubs and flowers that eagerly dressed forward to fill up the vacant spaces, as though asserting their right to enjoy the boon of light and air. At one corner, where the foliage became so thick as almost to shut out day, a large stone bench and sundry rustic seats indicated that this sheltered spot was either in general favor or particular use by some inhabitant of the house, which was faintly discernible through the dense mass of verdure that partially concealed it, though situated but 100 paces off. Whoever had selected this retired portion of the grounds as the boundary of a walk, or as a place for meditation, was abundantly justified in the choice by the absence of all glare, the cool, refreshing shade, the screen it afforded from the scorching rays of the sun, that found no entrance there even during the burning days of hottest summer, the incessant and melodious warbling of birds, and the entire removal from either the noise of the street or the bustle of the mansion. On the evening of one of the warmest days spring had yet bestowed on the inhabitants of Paris, might be seen negligently thrown upon the stone bench a book, a parasol, and a work-basket, from which hung a partly embroidered cambric handkerchief, while at a little distance from these articles was a young woman, standing close to the iron gate, endeavoring to discern something on the other side by means of the openings in the planks. The earnestness of her attitude and the fixed gaze with which she seemed to seek the object of her wishes, proving how much her feelings were interested in the matter. At that instant, the little side gate leading from the waste ground to the street was noiselessly opened, and a tall, powerful young man appeared. He was dressed in a common gray blouse and velvet cap, but his carefully arranged hair, beard, and mustache, all of the richest and glossiest black, ill accorded with his plebeian attire. After casting a rapid glance around him, in order to assure himself that he was unobserved, he entered by the small gate, and, carefully closing and securing it after him, proceeded with a hurried step towards the barrier. At the sight of him she expected, though probably not in such a costume, the young woman started in terror and was about to make a hasty retreat. But the eye of love had already seen, even through the narrow chinks of the wooden palisades, the movement of the white robe, and observed the fluttering of the blue sash. Pressing his lips close to the planks, he exclaimed, "Don T be alarmed, Valentine it is I." Again the timid girl found courage to return to the gate, saying, as she did so, "And why do you come so late today? It is almost dinner time, and I had to use no little diplomacy to get rid of my watchful stepmother, my too devoted maid, and my troublesome brother, who is always teasing me about coming to work at my embroidery, which I am in a fair way never to get done. So pray excuse yourself as well as you can for having made me wait, And after that, tell me why I see you in a dress so singular that at first I did not recognize you." "Dearest Valentine," said the young man, "the difference between our respective stations makes me fear to offend you by speaking of my love, but yet I cannot find myself in your presence without longing to pour forth my soul and tell you how fondly I adore you. If it be but to carry away with me the recollection of such sweet moments, I could even thank you for chiding me, for it leaves me a gleam of hope that if you did not expect me, and that indeed would be worse than vanity to suppose, at least I was in your thoughts. You ask me the cause of my being late and why I come disguised. I will candidly explain the reason of both, and I trust to your goodness to pardon me. I have chosen a trade." "A trade? Oh, Maximilian, how can you jest at a time when we have such deep cause for uneasiness? Heaven keep me from jesting with that which is far dearer to me than life itself. But listen to me, Valentine, and I will tell you all about it. I became weary of ranging fields and scaling walls, and seriously alarmed at the idea suggested by you, that if caught hovering about here, your father would very likely have me sent to prison as a thief. That would compromise the honor of the French army, to say nothing of the fact that the continual presence of a captain of Spahis in a place where no warlike projects could be supposed to account for it might well create surprise. So I have become a gardener, and consequently adopted the costume of my calling." "What excessive nonsense you talk, Maximilian! Nonsense! Pray do not call what I consider the wisest action of my life by such a name. Consider, by becoming a gardener I effectually screen our meetings from all suspicion or danger. I beseech of you, Maximilian, to cease trifling, and tell me what you really mean." "Simply that having ascertained that the piece of ground on which I stand was to let, I made application for it, was readily accepted by the proprietor, and am now master of this fine crop of lucerne. Think of that, Valentine. There is nothing now to prevent my building myself a little hut on my plantation, and residing not 20 yards from you. Only imagine what happiness that would afford me. I can scarcely contain myself at the bare idea. Such felicity seems above all price as a thing impossible and unattainable. But would you believe that I purchase all this delight, joy, and happiness, for which I would cheerfully have surrendered 10 years of my life, at the small cost of 500 francs per annum, paid quarterly? Henceforth we have nothing to fear. I am on my own ground, and have an undoubted right to place a ladder against the wall, and to look over when I please, without having any apprehensions of being taken off by the police as a suspicious character. I may also enjoy the precious privilege of assuring you of my fond, faithful, and unalterable affection, whenever you visit your favorite bower, unless, indeed, it offends your pride to listen to professions of love from the lips of a poor working man, clad in a blouse and cap." A faint cry of mingled pleasure and surprise escaped from the lips of Valentine, who almost instantly said, in a saddened tone, as though some envious cloud darkened the joy which illumined her heart, "Alas, no, Maximilian, this must not be, for many reasons. We should presume too much on our own strength, and like others, perhaps, be led astray by our blind confidence in each other's prudence. How can you for an instant entertain so unworthy a thought, dear Valentine? Have I not, from the first blessed hour of our acquaintance, schooled all my words and actions to your sentiments and ideas? And you have, I am sure, the fullest confidence in my honor. When you spoke to me of experiencing a vague and indefinite sense of coming danger, I placed myself blindly and devotedly at your service, asking no other reward than the pleasure of being useful to you. And have I ever since, by word or look, given you cause of regret for having selected me from the numbers that would willingly have sacrificed their lives for you? You told me, my dear Valentine, that you were engaged to M.D. Pinay, and that your father was resolved upon completing the match, and that from his will there was no appeal, as M. de Villefort was never known to change a determination once formed. I kept in the background as you wished and waited, not for the decision of your heart or my own, but hoping that Providence would graciously interpose in our behalf and order events in our favor. But what cared I for delays or difficulties, Valentine, as long as you confessed that you loved me and took pity on me? If you will only repeat that avowal now and then, I can endure anything. Ah, Maximilian, that is the very thing that makes you so bold, and which renders me at once so happy and unhappy, that I frequently ask myself whether it is better for me to endure the harshness of my stepmother and her blind preference for her own child, or to be, as I now am, insensible to any pleasure save such as I find in these meetings, so fraught with danger to both. I will not admit that word, returned the young man. It is at once cruel and unjust. Is it possible to find a more submissive slave than myself? You have permitted me to converse with you from time to time, Valentine, but forbidden my ever following you in your walks or elsewhere have I not obeyed. And since I found means to enter this enclosure to exchange a few words with you, through this gate to be close to you, without really seeing you have I ever asked so much as to touch the hem of your gown, or tried to pass this barrier, which is but a trifle to one of my youth and strength. Never has a complaint or a murmur escaped me. I have been bound by my promises as rigidly as any knight of olden times. Come, come, dearest Valentine, confess that what I say is true, lest I be tempted to call you unjust. It is true, said Valentine, as she passed the end of her slender fingers through a small opening in the planks, and permitted Maximilian to press his lips to them, and you are a true and faithful friend. But still you acted from motives of self-interest, my dear Maximilian, for you well knew that from the moment in which you had manifested an opposite spirit, all would have been ended between us. You promised to bestow on me the friendly affection of a brother. For I have no friend but yourself upon earth, who am neglected and forgotten by my father, harassed and persecuted by my stepmother, and left to the sole companionship of a paralyzed and speechless old man, whose withered hand can no longer press mine, and who can speak to me with the eye alone, although there still lingers in his heart the warmest tenderness for his poor grandchild. Oh, how bitter a fate is mine, to serve either as a victim or an enemy to all who are stronger than myself, while my only friend and supporter is a living corpse. Indeed, indeed, Maximilian, I am very miserable, and if you love me, it must be out of pity. Valentine, replied the young man, deeply affected, I will not say you are all I love in the world, for I dearly prize my sister and brother-in-law, but my affection for them is calm and tranquil, in no manner resembling what I feel for you. When I think of you, my heart beats fast, the blood burns in my veins, and I can hardly breathe. But I solemnly promise you to restrain all this ardor, this fervor and intensity of feeling, until you yourself shall require me to render them available in serving or assisting you. M. France is not expected to return home for a year to come, I am told. In that time many favorable and unforeseen chances may befriend us. Let us, then, hope for the best. Hope is so sweet a comforter. Meanwhile, Valentine, while reproaching me with selfishness, think a little what you have been to me, the beautiful but cold resemblance of a marble Venus. What promise of future reward have you made me for all the submission and obedience I have evinced? None whatever. What granted me, scarcely more, you tell me of M. France de Pinay, your betrothed lover, and you shrink from the idea of being his wife. But tell me, Valentine, is there no other sorrow in your heart? You see me devoted to you, body and soul. My life and each warm drop that circles round my heart are consecrated to your service. You know full well that my existence is bound up in yours, that were I to lose you, I would not outlive the hour of such crushing misery. Yet you speak with calmness of the prospect of your being the wife of another. Oh, Valentine, were I in your place, and did I feel conscious, as you do, of being worshipped, adored with such a love as mine, 100 times at least should I have passed my hand between these iron bars, and said, take this hand, dearest Maximilian, and believe that, living or dead, I am yours only, and forever." The poor girl made no reply, but her lover could plainly hear her sobs and tears. A rapid change took place in the young man's feelings. "Dearest, dearest Valentine," exclaimed he, "forgive me if I have offended you, and forget the words I spoke if they have unwittingly caused you pain." "No, Maximilian, I am not offended," answered she, "but do you not see what a poor, helpless being I am, almost a stranger and an outcast in my father's house, where even he is seldom seen, whose will has been thwarted, and spirits broken from the age of 10 years beneath the iron rod so sternly held over me? Oppressed, mortified, and persecuted, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute. No person has cared for, even observed my sufferings, nor have I ever breathed one word on the subject save to yourself. Outwardly and in the eyes of the world, I am surrounded by kindness and affection, but the reverse is the case. The general remark is, 'Oh, it cannot be expected that one of so stern a character as M. Villefort could lavish the tenderness some fathers do on their daughters. What though she has lost her own mother at a tender age? She has had the happiness to find a second mother in Madame de Villefort.' The world, however, is mistaken. My father abandons me from utter indifference, while my stepmother detests me with a hatred so much the more terrible because it is veiled beneath a continual smile." "Hate you, sweet Valentine!" exclaimed the young man. "How is it possible for anyone to do that?" "Alas," replied the weeping girl, "I am obliged to own that my stepmother's aversion to me arises from a very natural source, her overweening love for her own child, my brother Edward. But why should it? I do not know, but though unwilling to introduce money matters into our present conversation, I will just say this much, that her extreme dislike to me has its origin there, and I much fear she envies me the fortune I enjoy in right of my mother, and which will be more than doubled at the death of M. and Mme de Saint-Emran, whose sole heiress I am. Madame de Villefort has nothing of her own, and hates me for being so richly endowed. Alas, how gladly would I exchange the half of this wealth for the happiness of at least sharing my father's love. God knows I would prefer sacrificing the whole, so that it would obtain me a happy and affectionate home. Poor Valentine! I seem to myself as though living a life of bondage, yet at the same time am so conscious of my own weakness that I fear to break the restraint in which I am held, lest I fall utterly helpless. Then, too, my father is not a person whose orders may be infringed with impunity. Protected as he is by his high position and firmly established reputation for talent and unswerving integrity, no one could oppose him. He is all-powerful even with the king. He would crush you at a word. Dear Maximilian, believe me when I assure you that if I do not attempt to resist my father's commands, it is more on your account than my own. But why, Valentine, do you persist in anticipating the worst? Why picture so gloomy a future? Because I judge it from the past. Still, consider that although I may not be, strictly speaking, what is termed an illustrious match for you, I am, for many reasons, not altogether so much beneath your alliance. The days when such distinctions were so nicely weighed and considered no longer exist in France, and the first families of the monarchy have intermarried with those of the empire. The aristocracy of the lance has allied itself with the nobility of the cannon. Now I belong to this last-named class, and certainly my prospects of military preferment are most encouraging as well as certain. My fortune, though small, is free and unfettered, and the memory of my late father is respected in our country, Valentine, as that of the most upright and honorable merchant of the city. I say our country, because you were born not far from Marseille. Dantès speak of Marseille, I beg of you, Maximilian. That one word brings back my mother to my recollection, my angel mother, who died too soon for myself and all who knew her, but who, after watching over her child during the brief period allotted to her in this world, now, I fondly hope, watches from her home in heaven. Oh, if my mother were still living, there would be nothing to fear, Maximilian, for I would tell her that I loved you, and she would protect us. I fear, Valentine, replied the lover, that were she living I should never have had the happiness of knowing you. You would then have been too happy to have stooped from your grandeur to bestow a thought on me. Now it is you who are unjust, Maximilian, cried Valentine, but there is one thing I wish to know. And what is that? Inquired the young man, perceiving that Valentine hesitated. Tell me truly, Maximilian, whether in former days, when our fathers dwelt at Marseille, there was ever any misunderstanding between them. Not that I am aware of, replied the young man, unless, indeed, any ill feeling might have arisen from their being of opposite parties. Your father was, as you know, a zealous partisan of the Bourbons, while mine was wholly devoted to the emperor. There could not possibly be any other difference between them. But why do you ask? I will tell you, replied the young girl, for it is but right you should know. Well, on the day when your appointment as an officer of the Legion of Honor was announced in the papers, we were all sitting with my grandfather, M. Noirtier. M. Danglars was there also. You recollect M. Danglars, do you not, Maximilian, the banker, whose horses ran away with my stepmother and little brother, and very nearly killed them? While the rest of the company were discussing the approaching marriage of Mademoiselle Danglars, I was reading the paper to my grandfather. But when I came to the paragraph about you, although I had done nothing else but read it over to myself all the morning, you know you had told me all about it the previous evening, I felt so happy, and yet so nervous at the idea of speaking your name aloud, and before so many people, that I really think I should have passed it over, but for the fear that my doing so might create suspicions as to the cause of my silence. So I summoned up all my courage, and read it as firmly and as steadily as I could. Dear Valentine, well, would you believe it? Directly my father caught the sound of your name, he turned round quite hastily, and like a poor silly thing, I was so persuaded that everyone must be as much affected as myself by the utterance of your name, that I was not surprised to see my father start, and almost tremble. But I even thought, though that surely must have been a mistake, that M. Danglars trembled too. Moral, cried my father, stop a bit. Then knitting his brows into a deep frown, he added, surely this cannot be one of the Moral family who lived at Marseille, and gave us so much trouble from their violent Bonapartism, I mean about the year 1815. Yes, replied M. Danglars, I believe he is the son of the old shipowner. Indeed, answered Maximilian. And what did your father say then, Valentine? Oh, such a dreadful thing that I don't dare to tell you. Always tell me everything, said Maximilian with a smile. Ah, continued my father, still frowning, their idolized emperor treated these madmen as they deserved. He called them food for cannon, which was precisely all they were good for. And I am delighted to see that the present government have adopted this salutary principle with all its pristine vigor. If Algiers were good for nothing, but to furnish the means of carrying so admirable an idea into practice, it would be an acquisition well worthy of struggling to obtain. Though it certainly does cost France somewhat dear to assert her rights in that uncivilized country. Brutal politics, I must confess, said Maximilian, but don't attach any serious importance, dear, to what your father said. My father was not a bit behind yours in that sort of talk. Why, said he, does not the emperor, who has devised so many clever and efficient modes of improving the art of war, organize a regiment of lawyers, judges, and legal practitioners, sending them in the hottest fire the enemy could maintain, and using them to save better men? You see, my dear, that for picturesque expression and generosity of spirit, there is not much to choose between the language of either party. But what did M. Danglars say to this outburst on the part of the procureur? Oh, he laughed, and in that singular manner so peculiar to himself, half malicious, half ferocious. He almost immediately got up and took his leave. Then, for the first time, I observed the agitation of my grandfather, and I must tell you, Maximilian, that I am the only person capable of discerning emotion in his paralyzed frame. And I suspected that the conversation that had been carried on in his presence, for they always say and do what they like before the dear old man, without the smallest regard for his feelings, had made a strong impression on his mind. For naturally enough, it must have pained him to hear the emperor he so devotedly loved and served spoken of in that depreciating manner. The name of M. Noirtier, interposed Maximilian, is celebrated throughout Europe. He was a statesman of high standing, and you may or may not know, Valentine, that he took a leading part in every Bonapartist conspiracy set on foot during the restoration of the Bourbons. Oh, I have often heard whispers of things that seemed to me most strange. The father a Bonapartist, the son a royalist. What can have been the reason of so singular a difference in parties and politics? But to resume my story, I turned towards my grandfather as though to question him as to the cause of his emotion. He looked expressively at the newspaper I had been reading. "What is the matter, dear grandfather?" said I. "Are you pleased?" He gave me a sign in the affirmative. With what my father said just now, he returned a sign in the negative. Perhaps you liked what M. Danglars said. Another sign in the negative. Oh, then, you were glad to hear that M. Morel, I didn't dare to say Maximilian, had been made an officer of the Legion of Honor. He signified assent. Only think of the poor old man being so pleased to think that you, who were a perfect stranger to him, had been made an officer of the Legion of Honor. Perhaps it was a mere whim on his part, for he is falling, they say, into second childhood, but I love him for showing so much interest in you. How singular, murmured Maximilian. Your father hates me, while your grandfather, on the contrary, what strange feelings are aroused by politics. Hush, cried Valentine, suddenly, someone is coming. Maximilian leaped at one bound into his crop of lucerne, which he began to pull up in the most ruthless way, under the pretext of being occupied in weeding it. "Mademoiselle, mademoiselle," exclaimed a voice from behind the trees. "Madame is searching for you everywhere. There is a visitor in the drawing-room." "A visitor?" inquired Valentine, much agitated. "Who is it?" "Some grand personage, a prince, I believe. They said the Count of Monte Cristo." "I will come directly," cried Valentine aloud. The name of Monte Cristo sent an electric shock through the young man on the other side of the iron gate, to whom Valentine's "I am coming" was the customary signal of farewell. "Now then," said Maximilian, leaning on the handle of his spade, "I would give a good deal to know how it comes about that the Count of Monte Cristo is acquainted with M. de Villefort."
Chapter 52.
It was really the Count of Monte Cristo who had just arrived at Madame de Villefort's for the purpose of returning the procuror's visit, and at his name, as may be easily imagined, the whole house was in confusion. Madame de Villefort, who was alone in her drawing-room when the Count was announced, desired that her son might be brought thither instantly to renew his thanks to the Count. And Edward, who heard this great personage talked of for 2 whole days, made all possible haste to come to him, not from obedience to his mother, or out of any feeling of gratitude to the Count, but from sheer curiosity, and that some chance remark might give him the opportunity for making one of the impertinent speeches which made his mother say, "Oh, that naughty child! But I can be severe with him, he is really so bright." After the usual civilities, the Count inquired after M. de Villefort. "My husband dines with the Chancellor," replied the young lady. "He has just gone, and I am sure he'll be exceedingly sorry not to have had the pleasure of seeing you before he went." 2 visitors who were there when the Count arrived, having gazed at him with all their eyes, retired after that reasonable delay which politeness admits and curiosity requires. "What is your sister Valentine doing?" inquired Madame de Villefort of Edward. "Tell someone to bid her come here, that I may have the honor of introducing her to the Count." "You have a daughter, then, madame?" inquired the Count. "Very young, I presume." "The daughter of M. de Villefort by his first marriage," replied the young wife, "a fine, well-grown girl." "But melancholy," interrupted Master Edward, snatching the feathers out of the tail of a splendid paroquet that was screaming on its gilded perch in order to make a plume for his hat. Madame de Villefort merely cried, "Be still, Edward." She then added, "This young madcap is, however, very nearly right, and merely re-echoes what he has heard me say with pain 100 times. For Mademoiselle de Villefort is, in spite of all we can do to rouse her, of a melancholy disposition and taciturn habit, which frequently injure the effect of her beauty. But what detains her? Go, Edward, and see, because they are looking for her where she is not to be found." "And where are they looking for her? With Grandpapa Noirtier. And do you think she is not there?" "No, no, 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 she is not there," replied Edward, singing his words. "And where is she then? If you know, why don't you tell?" "She is under the big chestnut tree," replied the spoiled brat, as he gave, in spite of his mother's commands, live flies to the parrot, which seemed keenly to relish such fare. Madame de Villefort stretched out her hand to ring, intending to direct her waiting-maid to the spot where she would find Valentine, when the young lady herself entered the apartment. She appeared much dejected, and any person who considered her attentively might have observed the traces of recent tears in her eyes. Valentine, whom we have in the rapid march of our narrative presented to our readers without formally introducing her, was a tall and graceful girl of 19, with bright chestnut hair, deep blue eyes, and that reposeful air of quiet distinction which characterized her mother. Her white and slender fingers, her pearly neck, her cheeks tinted with varying hues, reminded one of the lovely Englishwomen who have been so poetically compared in their manner to the gracefulness of a swan. She entered the apartment, and seeing near her stepmother the stranger of whom she had already heard so much, saluted him without any girlish awkwardness, or even lowering her eyes, and with an elegance that redoubled the Countess' attention. He rose to return the salutation. "Mademoiselle de Villefort, my stepdaughter," said Madame de Villefort to Monte Cristo, leaning back on her sofa and motioning towards Valentine with her hand. "And M. de Monte Cristo, King of China, Emperor of Cochin China," said the young imp, looking slyly towards his sister. Madame de Villefort at this really did turn pale, and was very nearly angry with this household plague, who answered to the name of Edward. But the Count, on the contrary, smiled, and appeared to look at the boy complacently, which caused the maternal heart to bound again with joy and enthusiasm. "But, Madame," replied the Count, continuing the conversation, and looking by turns at Madame de Villefort and Valentine, "have I not already had the honor of meeting yourself and Mademoiselle before?" I could not help thinking so just now. The idea came over my mind, and as Mademoiselle entered the sight of her was an additional ray of light thrown on a confused remembrance. Excuse the remark. "I do not think it likely, sir. Mademoiselle de Villefort is not very fond of society, and we very seldom go out," said the young lady. "Then it was not in society that I met with Mademoiselle or yourself, Madame, or this charming little merry boy. Besides, the Parisian world is entirely unknown to me, for, as I believe I told you, I have been in Paris but very few days. No, but perhaps you will permit me to call to mind stay." The Count placed his hand on his brow as if to collect his thoughts. "No, it was somewhere away from here. It was I do not know, but it appears that this recollection is connected with a lovely sky and some religious FT. Mademoiselle was holding flowers in her hand. The interesting boy was chasing a beautiful peacock in a garden, and you, Madame, were under the trellis of some arbor. Pray come to my aid, Madame. Do not these circumstances appeal to your memory?" "No, indeed," replied Madame de Villefort, "and yet it appears to me, sir, that if I had met you anywhere, the recollection of you must have been imprinted on my memory." "Perhaps the Count saw us in Italy," said Valentine timidly. "Yes, in Italy. It was in Italy most probably, replied Monte Cristo. You have traveled then in Italy, mademoiselle? Yes. Madame and I were there 2 years ago. The doctors, anxious for my lungs, had prescribed the air of Naples. We went by Bologna, Perugia, and Rome. Ah, yes, true, mademoiselle, exclaimed Monte Cristo, as if this simple explanation was sufficient to revive the recollection he sought. It was at Perugia on Corpus Christi Day, in the garden of the Hôtel des Postes, when chance brought us together. You, Madame de Villefort, and her son. I now remember having had the honor of meeting you. I perfectly well remember Perugia, sir, and the Hôtel des Postes, and the festival of which you speak, said Madame de Villefort. But in vain do I tax my memory, of whose treachery I am ashamed, for I really do not recall to mind that I ever had the pleasure of seeing you before. It is strange, but neither do I recollect meeting with you, observed Valentine, raising her beautiful eyes to the Count. But I remember it perfectly, interposed the darling Edward. I will assist your memory, madame, continued the Count. The day had been burning hot. You were waiting for horses, which were delayed in consequence of the festival. Mademoiselle was walking in the shade of the garden, and your son disappeared in pursuit of the peacock. And I caught it, mamma, Dante, you remember, interposed Edward, and I pulled 3 such beautiful feathers out of his tail. You, madame, remained under the arbor. Do you not remember that while you were seated on a stone bench, and while, as I told you, Mademoiselle de Villefort and your young son were absent, you conversed for a considerable time with somebody? Yes, in truth, yes, answered the young lady, turning very red. I do remember conversing with a person wrapped in a long woolen mantle. He was a medical man, I think. Precisely so, madame. This man was myself. For a fortnight I had been at that hotel, during which period I had cured my valet de chambre of a fever and my landlord of the jaundice, so that I really acquired a reputation as a skillful physician. We discoursed a long time, madame, on different subjects, of Perugino, of Raphael, of manners, customs, of the famous Aqua Tofana, of which they had told you. I think you said that certain individuals in Perugia had preserved the secret. Yes, true, replied Madame de Villefort, somewhat uneasily, I remember now. I do not recollect now all the various subjects of which we discoursed, madame, continued the Count with perfect calmness, but I perfectly remember that, falling into the error which others had entertained respecting me, you consulted me as to the health of Mademoiselle de Villefort. Yes, really, sir, you were in fact a medical man, said Madame de Villefort, since you had cured the sick. Molière or Beaumarchais would reply to you, madame, that it was precisely because I was not that I had cured my patients. For myself, I am content to say to you that I have studied chemistry and the natural sciences somewhat deeply, but still only as an amateur, you understand. At this moment the clock struck 6. It is 6 o'clock, said Madame de Villefort, evidently agitated. Valentine, will you not go and see if your grandpapa will have his dinner? Valentine rose and, saluting the Count, left the apartment without speaking. Oh, madame, said the Count, when Valentine had left the room, was it on my account that you sent Mademoiselle de Villefort away? By no means, replied the young lady quickly, but this is the hour when we usually give him Noirtier the unwelcome meal that sustains his pitiful existence. You are aware, sir, of the deplorable condition of my husband's father. Yes, Madame M. de Villefort spoke of it to me, a paralysis, I think. Alas, yes. The poor old gentleman is entirely helpless. The mind alone is still active in this human machine, and that is faint and flickering, like the light of a lamp about to expire. But excuse me, sir, for talking of our domestic misfortunes. I interrupted you at the moment when you were telling me that you were a skillful chemist. No, madame, I did not say as much as that, replied the Count with a smile. Quite the contrary. I have studied chemistry because, having determined to live in Eastern climates, I have been desirous of following the example of King Mithridates. Mithridates, Rex Ponticus, said the young scamp, as he tore some beautiful portraits out of a splendid album, the individual who took cream in his cup of poison every morning at breakfast. Edward, you naughty boy, exclaimed Madame de Villefort, snatching the mutilated book from the urchin's grasp. You are positively past bearing. You really disturb the conversation. Go, leave us, and join your sister Valentine in dear Grandpapa Noirtier's room. The album, said Edward sulkily. What do you mean, the album? I want the album. How dare you tear out the drawings? Oh, it amuses me. Go at once. I want to go unless you give me the album, said the boy, seating himself doggedly in an armchair according to his habit of never giving way. Take it then, and pray disturb us no longer, said Madame de Villefort, giving the album to Edward, who then went towards the door, led by his mother. The Count followed her with his eyes. Let us see if she shuts the door after him, he muttered. Madame de Villefort closed the door carefully after the child, the Count appearing not to notice her. Then casting a scrutinizing glance around the chamber, the young wife returned to her chair, in which she seated herself. Allow me to observe, madame, said the Count, with that kind tone he could assume so well, you are really very severe with that dear clever child. Oh, sometimes severity is quite necessary, replied Madame de Villefort, with all a mother's real firmness. It was his Cornelius Nepos that Master Edward was repeating when he referred to King Mithridates, continued the Count, and you interrupted him in a quotation which proves that his tutor has by no means neglected him, for your son is really advanced for his years. The fact is, Count, answered the mother, agreeably flattered, he has great aptitude and learns all that is set before him. He has but one fault, he is somewhat willful. But really, on referring for the moment to what he said, do you truly believe that Mithridates used these precautions, and that these precautions were efficacious? I think so, madame, because I myself have made use of them, that I might not be poisoned at Naples, at Palermo, and at Smyrna, that is to say, on 3 several occasions when, but for these precautions, I must have lost my life. And your precautions were successful, completely so. Yes, I remember now your mentioning to me at Perugia something of this sort. Indeed, said the Count with an air of surprise, remarkably well counterfeited, I really did not remember. I inquired of you if poisons acted equally, and with the same effect, on men of the North as on men of the South, and you answered me that the cold and sluggish habits of the North did not present the same aptitude as the rich and energetic temperaments of the natives of the South. And that is the case, observed Monte Cristo. I have seen Russians devour, without being visibly inconvenienced, vegetable substances which would infallibly have killed a Neapolitan or an Arab. And you really believe the result would be still more sure with us than in the East. And in the midst of our fogs and rains, a man would habituate himself more easily than in a warm latitude to this progressive absorption of poison. Certainly, it being at the same time perfectly understood that he should have been duly fortified against the poison to which he had not been accustomed. Yes, I understand that. And how would you habituate yourself, for instance, or rather, how did you habituate yourself to it? Oh, very easily. Suppose you knew beforehand the poison that would be made use of against you. Suppose the poison was, for instance, brucine. Brucine is extracted from the false Angostura 8, is it not? Inquired Madame de Villefort. Precisely, madame, replied Monte Cristo, but I perceive I have not much to teach you. Allow me to compliment you on your knowledge. Such learning is very rare among ladies. Oh, I am aware of that, said Madame de Villefort, but I have a passion for the occult sciences, which speak to the imagination like poetry, and are reducible to figures like an algebraic equation. But go on, I beg of you. What you say interests me to the greatest degree. Well, replied Monte Cristo, suppose, then, that this poison was brucine, and you were to take 1 milligram the first day, 2 milligrams the second day, and so on. Well, at the end of 10 days you would have taken a centigram. At the end of 20 days, increasing another milligram, you would have taken 300 centigrams. That is to say, a dose which you would support without inconvenience, and which would be very dangerous for any other person who had not taken the same precautions as yourself. Well then, at the end of a month, when drinking water from the same carafe, you would kill the person who drank with you without your perceiving, otherwise than from slight inconvenience, that there was any poisonous substance mingled with this water. Do you know any other counterpoisons? I do not. I have often read and read again the history of Mithridates, said Madame de Villefort in a tone of reflection, and had always considered it a fable. No, madame, contrary to most history, it is true. But what you tell me, madame, what you inquire of me, is not the result of a chance query. For 2 years ago you asked me the same questions, and said then, that for a very long time this history of Mithridates had occupied your mind. True, sir. The 2 favorite studies of my youth were botany and mineralogy, and subsequently, when I learned that the use of simples frequently explained the whole history of a people, and the entire life of individuals in the East, as flowers betoken and symbolize a love affair, I have regretted that I was not a man, that I might have been a Flamel, a Fontana, or a Cabanis. And the more, madame, said Monte Cristo, as the Orientals do not confine themselves, as did Mithridates, to make a cuirass of his poisons, but they also made them a dagger. Science becomes, in their hands, not only a defensive weapon, but still more frequently an offensive one. The one serves against all their physical sufferings, the other against all their enemies. With opium, belladonna, brucia, snakewood, and the cherry laurel, they put to sleep all who stand in their way. There is not one of those women, Egyptian, Turkish, or Greek, whom here you call good women, who do not know how, by means of chemistry, to stupefy a doctor, and in psychology to amaze a confessor. Really, said Madame de Villefort, whose eyes sparkled with strange fire at this conversation. Oh, yes, indeed, madame, continued Monte Cristo. The secret dramas of the East begin with a love philtre, and end with a death potion, begin with paradise, and end with hell. There are as many elixirs of every kind as there are caprices and peculiarities in the physical and moral nature of humanity. And I will say further, the art of these chemists is capable with the utmost precision to accommodate and proportion the remedy, and the bane to yearnings for love or desires for vengeance. But, sir, remarked the young woman, these Eastern societies, in the midst of which you have passed a portion of your existence, are as fantastic as the tales that come from their strange land. A man can easily be put out of the way there, then. It is, indeed, the Baghdad and Basra of the 1001 Nights. The sultans and viziers who rule over society there, and who constitute what in France we call the government, are really Haroun al-Raskids and Jaafars, who not only pardon a poisoner, but even make him a prime minister if his crime has been an ingenious one, and who, under such circumstances, have the whole story written in letters of gold, to divert their hours of idleness and ennui. By no means, madame. The fanciful exists no longer in the East. There, disguised under other names and concealed under other costumes, are police agents, magistrates, attorneys general, and bailiffs. They hang, behead, and impale their criminals in the most agreeable possible manner. But some of these, like clever rogues, have contrived to escape human justice, and succeed in their fraudulent enterprises by cunning stratagems. Amongst us, a simpleton, possessed by the demon of hate or cupidity, who has an enemy to destroy or some near relation to dispose of, goes straight to the grocer S or druggist S, gives a false name, which leads more easily to his detection than his real one, and under the pretext that the rats prevent him from sleeping, purchases 5 or 6 grams of arsenic. If he is really a cunning fellow, he goes to 5 or 6 different druggists or grocers, and thereby becomes only 5 or 6 times more easily traced. Then, when he has acquired his specific, he administers duly to his enemy, or near kinsman, a dose of arsenic which would make a mammoth or mastodon burst, and which, without rhyme or reason, makes his victim utter groans which alarm the entire neighborhood. Then arrive a crowd of policemen and constables. They fetch a doctor, who opens the dead body, and collects from the entrails and stomach a quantity of arsenic in a spoon. Next day 100 newspapers relate the fact, with the names of the victim and the murderer. The same evening the grocer or grocers, druggist or druggists come and say, "It was I who sold the arsenic to the gentleman," and rather than not recognize the guilty purchaser, they will recognize 20. Then the foolish criminal is taken, imprisoned, interrogated, confronted, confounded, condemned, and cut off by hemp or steel, or if she be a woman of any consideration, they lock her up for life. This is the way in which you Northerns understand chemistry, madame. Desrues was, however, I must confess, more skillful. "What would you have, sir?" said the lady, laughing. "We do what we can. All the world has not the secret of the Medicis or the Borgias." "Now," replied the Count, shrugging his shoulders, "shall I tell you the cause of all these stupidities? It is because, at your theaters, by what at least I could judge by reading the pieces they play, they see persons swallow the contents of a phial, or suck the button of a ring, and fall dead instantly. 5 minutes afterwards the curtain falls, and the spectators depart. They are ignorant of the consequences of the murder. They see neither the police commissary with his badge of office, nor the corporal with his 4 men. And so the poor fools believe that the whole thing is as easy as lying. But go a little way from France, go either to Aleppo or Cairo, or only to Naples or Rome, and you will see people passing by you in the streets, people erect, smiling, and fresh-colored, of whom Asmodeus, if you were holding on by the skirt of his mantle, would say, 'That man was poisoned 3 weeks ago. He will be a dead man in a month.'" "Then," remarked Madame de Villefort, "they have again discovered the secret of the famous aqua tofana that they said was lost at Perugia." "Ah, but madame, does mankind ever lose anything? The arts change about and make a tour of the world. Things take a different name, and the vulgar do not follow them, that is all. But there is always the same result. Poisons act particularly on some organ or another one on the stomach, another on the brain, another on the intestines. Well, the poison brings on a cough, the cough an inflammation of the lungs, or some other complaint catalogued in the book of science, which, however, by no means precludes it from being decidedly mortal, and if it were not, would be sure to become so, thanks to the remedies applied by foolish doctors, who are generally bad chemists, and which will act in favor of or against the malady, as you please. And then there is a human being killed according to all the rules of art and skill, and of whom justice learns nothing, as was said by a terrible chemist of my acquaintance, the worthy Abbé Adelmont of Taormina in Sicily, who has studied these national phenomena very profoundly. It is quite frightful but deeply interesting," said the young lady, motionless with attention. "I thought, I must confess, that these tales were inventions of the Middle Ages. Yes, no doubt, but improved upon by ours. What is the use of time, rewards of merit, medals, crosses, Munthian prizes, if they do not lead society towards more complete perfection? Yet man will never be perfect until he learns to create and destroy. He does know how to destroy, and that is half the battle." So added Madame de Villefort, constantly returning to her object, the poisons of the Borgias, the Medicis, the Rennes, the Ruggierists, and later, probably, that of Baron de Trenck, whose story has been so misused by modern drama and romance, were objects of art, madame, and nothing more, replied the Count. "Do you suppose that the real savant addresses himself stupidly to the mere individual? By no means. Science loves eccentricities, leaps and bounds, trials of strength, fancies, if I may be allowed so to term them. Thus, for instance, the excellent Abbé Adelmont, of whom I spoke just now, made in this way some marvelous experiments. Really? Yes, I will mention one to you. He had a remarkably fine garden, full of vegetables, flowers, and fruit. From amongst these vegetables he selected the most simple, a cabbage, for instance. For 3 days he watered this cabbage with a distillation of arsenic. On the third, the cabbage began to droop and turn yellow. At that moment he cut it. In the eyes of everybody it seemed fit for table and preserved its wholesome appearance. It was only poison to the Abbe Adelmont. He then took the cabbage to the room where he had rabbits, for the Abbe Adelmont had a collection of rabbits, cats, and guinea pigs, fully as fine as his collection of vegetables, flowers, and fruit. Well, the Abbe Adelmont took a rabbit and made it eat a leaf of the cabbage. The rabbit died. What magistrate would find, or even venture to insinuate, anything against this? What procureur has ever ventured to draw up an accusation against M. Magendie or M. Flowerins in consequence of the rabbits, cats, and guinea pigs they have killed? Not one. So then the rabbit dies and justice takes no notice. This rabbit dead, the Abbe Adelmont has its entrails taken out by his cook and thrown on the dunghill. On this dunghill is a hen, who, pecking these intestines, is in her turn taken ill and dies next day. At the moment when she is struggling in the convulsions of death, a vulture is flying by. There are a good many vultures in Adelmont's country. This bird darts on the dead fowl and carries it away to a rock, where it dines off its prey. 3 days afterwards, this poor vulture, which has been very much indisposed since that dinner, suddenly feels very giddy while flying aloft in the clouds, and falls heavily into a fish pond. The pike, eels, and carp eat greedily always, as everybody knows well. They feast on the vulture. Now suppose that next day, one of these eels or pike or carp, poisoned at the 4th remove, is served up at your table. Well then, your guest will be poisoned at the 5th remove, and die at the end of 8 or 10 days, of pains in the intestines, sickness, or abscess of the pylorus. The doctors open the body and say with an air of profound learning, the subject has died of a tumor on the liver, or of typhoid fever. But, remarked Madame de Villefort, all these circumstances which you link thus to one another may be broken by the least accident. The vulture may not see the fowl, or may fall 100 yards from the fish pond. Ah, that is where the art comes in. To be a great chemist in the East, one must direct chance, and this is to be achieved. Madame de Villefort was in deep thought, yet listened attentively. But she exclaimed, suddenly, arsenic is indelible, indestructible. In whatsoever way it is absorbed, it will be found again in the body of the victim from the moment when it has been taken in sufficient quantity to cause death. Precisely so, cried Monte Cristo, precisely so. And this is what I said to my worthy Adelmont. He reflected, smiled, and replied to me by a Sicilian proverb, which I believe is also a French proverb, my son. The world was not made in a day, but in 7. Return on Sunday. On the Sunday following I did return to him. Instead of having watered his cabbage with arsenic, he had watered it this time with a solution of salts, having their basis in strychnine, strychnos colubrina, as the learned term it. Now the cabbage had not the slightest appearance of disease in the world, and the rabbit had not the smallest distrust. Yet 5 minutes afterwards the rabbit was dead. The fowl pecked at the rabbit, and the next day was a dead hen. This time we were the vultures, so we opened the bird, and this time all special symptoms had disappeared. There were only general symptoms. There was no peculiar indication in any organ and excitement of the nervous system, that was it. A case of cerebral congestion, nothing more. The fowl had not been poisoned, she had died of apoplexy. Apoplexy is a rare disease among fowls, I believe, but very common among men. Madame de Villefort appeared more and more thoughtful. It is very fortunate, she observed, that such substances could only be prepared by chemists. Otherwise, all the world would be poisoning each other. By chemists and persons who have a taste for chemistry, said Monte Cristo carelessly. And then, said Madame de Villefort, endeavoring by a struggle, and with effort to get away from her thoughts, however skillfully it is prepared. Crime is always crime, and if it avoid human scrutiny, it does not escape the eye of God. The Orientals are stronger than we are in cases of conscience, and very prudently, have no hell. That is the point. Really, madame, this is a scruple which naturally must occur to a pure mind like yours, but which would easily yield before sound reasoning. The bad side of human thought will always be defined by the paradox of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. You remember, the Mandarin who is killed 500 leagues off by raising the tip of the finger. Man's whole life passes in doing these things, and his intellect is exhausted by reflecting on them. You will find very few persons who will go and brutally thrust a knife in the heart of a fellow creature, or will administer to him, in order to remove him from the surface of the globe on which we move with life and animation, that quantity of arsenic of which we just now talked. Such a thing is really out of rule, eccentric, or stupid. To attain such a point, the blood must be heated to 36 degrees, the pulse be, at least, at 90, and the feelings excited beyond the ordinary limit. But suppose one pass, as is permissible in philology, from the word itself to its softened synonym. Then, instead of committing an ignoble assassination, you make an elimination. You merely and simply remove from your path the individual who is in your way, and that without shock or violence, without the display of the sufferings which, in the case of becoming a punishment, make a martyr of the victim, and a butcher, in every sense of the word, of him who inflicts them. Then there will be no blood, no groans, no convulsions, and above all, no consciousness of that horrid and compromising moment of accomplishing the act. Then one escapes the clutch of the human law, which says, "Do not disturb society." This is the mode in which they manage these things, and succeed in Eastern climes, where there are grave and phlegmatic persons who care very little for the questions of time in conjunctures of importance. Yet conscience remains, remarked Madame de Villefort in an agitated voice and with a stifled sigh. Yes, answered Monte Cristo happily, yes, conscience does remain, and if it did not, how wretched we should be. After every action requiring exertion, it is conscience that saves us, for it supplies us with 1,000 good excuses, of which we alone are judges. And these reasons, howsoever excellent in producing sleep, would avail us but very little before a tribunal, when we were tried for our lives. Thus Richard III, for instance, was marvelously served by his conscience after the putting away of the 2 children of Edward IV. In fact, he could say, "These 2 children of a cruel and persecuting king, who have inherited the vices of their father, which I alone could perceive in their juvenile propensities, these 2 children are impediments in my way of promoting the happiness of the English people, whose unhappiness they, the children, would infallibly have caused." Thus was Lady Macbeth served by her conscience, when she sought to give her son, and not her husband, whatever Shakespeare may say, a throne. Ah, maternal love is a great virtue, a powerful motive, so powerful that it excuses a multitude of things, even if, after Duncan's death, Lady Macbeth had been at all pricked by her conscience. Madame de Villefort listened with avidity to these appalling maxims and horrible paradoxes, delivered by the Count with that ironical simplicity which was peculiar to him. After a moment's silence, the lady inquired, "Do you know, my dear Count," she said, "that you are a very terrible reasoner, and that you look at the world through a somewhat distempered medium? Have you really measured the world by scrutinies, or through alembics and crucibles? For you must indeed be a great chemist, and the elixir you administered to my son, which recalled him to life almost instantaneously, oh, do not place any reliance on that, madame. 1 drop of that elixir sufficed to recall life to a dying child, but 3 drops would have impelled the blood into his lungs in such a way as to have produced most violent palpitations. 6 would have suspended his respiration, and caused syncope more serious than that in which he was. 10 would have destroyed him. You know, madame, how suddenly I snatched him from those phials which he so imprudently touched. Is it then so terrible a poison? Oh, no. In the first place, let us agree that the word poison does not exist, because in medicine use is made of the most violent poisons, which become, according as they are employed, most salutary remedies. What then is it? A skillful preparation of my friend S. the worthy Abbe Delmont, who taught me the use of it. Oh, observed Madame de Villefort, it must be an admirable antispasmodic. Perfect, Madame, as you have seen, replied the Count, and I frequently make use of it with all possible prudence, though, be it observed, he added with a smile of intelligence. Most assuredly, responded Madame de Villefort in the same tone. As for me, so nervous, and so subject to fainting fits, I should require a Dr. Adelmont to invent for me some means of breathing freely and tranquilizing my mind, in the fear I have of dying some fine day of suffocation. In the meanwhile, as the thing is difficult to find in France, and your Abbe is not probably disposed to make a journey to Paris on my account, I must continue to use Monsieur Planche's antispasmodics, and Mint and Hoffmann S. drops are among my favorite remedies. Here are some lozenges which I have made up on purpose. They are compounded doubly strong. Monte Cristo opened the tortoiseshell box, which the lady presented to him, and inhaled the odor of the lozenges with the air of an amateur who thoroughly appreciated their composition. They are indeed exquisite, he said, but as they are necessarily submitted to the process of deglutition, a function which it is frequently impossible for a fainting person to accomplish, I prefer my own specific. Undoubtedly, and so should I prefer it, after the effects I have seen produced, but of course it is a secret, and I am not so indiscreet as to ask it of you. But I, said Monte Cristo, rising as he spoke, I am gallant enough to offer it you. How kind you are! Only remember one thing, a small dose is a remedy, a large one is poison. 1 drop will restore life, as you have seen. 5 or 6 will inevitably kill, and in a way the more terrible, inasmuch as, poured into a glass of wine, it would not in the slightest degree affect its flavor. But I say no more, Madame. It is really as if I were prescribing for you. The clock struck 6:30, and a lady was announced, a friend of Madame de Villefort, who came to dine with her. If I had had the honor of seeing you for the 3rd or 4th time, Count, instead of only for the 2nd, said Madame de Villefort, if I had had the honor of being your friend, instead of only having the happiness of being under an obligation to you, I should insist on detaining you to dinner, and not allow myself to be daunted by a first refusal. 1,000 thanks, Madame, replied Monte Cristo, but I have an engagement which I cannot break. I have promised to escort to the Academy a Greek princess of my acquaintance who has never seen your grand opera, and who relies on me to conduct her thither. Adieu then, sir, and do not forget the prescription. Ah, in truth, Madame, to do that I must forget the hour's conversation I have had with you, which is indeed impossible. Monte Cristo bowed and left the house. Madame de Villefort remained immersed in thought. He is a very strange man, she said, and in my opinion is himself the Adelmont he talks about. As to Monte Cristo, the result had surpassed his utmost expectations. Good, said he as he went away, this is a fruitful soil, and I feel certain that the seed sown will not be cast on barren ground. Next morning, faithful to his promise, he sent the prescription requested.
Will the weight of secrets shatter the soul, or will courage rise to meet the shadows? Can hope endure in a world cloaked in deception and despair? Discover the answers in next week's chapter. Join us Tuesday on Raining Book. Subscribe and tap the bell to follow every heart-pounding twist of fate and resilience. Tell us below, whose journey captivates you most? The steadfast hero forging a path through chaos, the enigmatic figure pulling strings from the shadows, or the quiet souls seeking light amidst darkness? Every like, comment, or share fuels our mission to bring stories as gripping and unforgettable as Dumas' masterpiece. Until then, keep your imagination alive for whispered plots and grand revelations. Happy listening.